Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. Before we begin, turn on notifications so you don't miss any future videos, and please leave a like if you enjoy tonight's stories. The first experience comes from a man who went into his girlfriend's grandparents' house while they were away. He didn't know the house very well, so he already felt a little uneasy. While waiting for his girlfriend to get ready, he looked toward the stairs and saw what appeared to be a man made of blue mist. Things became even stranger when the back door opened on its own. Anyway, relax and sleep well tonight. I can honestly say, what you described is almost exactly what I witnessed one night. Even now, nearly 20 years later, I can still picture it clearly. My wife and I started dating in high school. Back then, we were both still living with our parents, so finding time alone together required a little creativity. We met in parking lots, took long drives, and found quiet places where nobody was likely to disturb us. One winter evening, she suggested something different. Her grandparents spent several weeks down south every year, leaving their house empty. She had a key to the back door and thought we could slip inside for a little privacy. I wasn't comfortable with the idea. Technically, we weren't breaking in, but it still felt wrong sneaking into someone else's home. Eventually, though, she convinced me. The house was in a quiet Midwestern neighborhood where all the homes sat close together. We parked around the corner so the car wouldn't look suspicious, then walked down the narrow driveway toward the back entrance. She unlocked the door, and we stepped into a small kitchen. We took off our shoes and left every light turned off. The last thing we wanted was for a neighbor to notice movement inside a house that was supposed to be empty. This was my first time there, so I had no idea where anything was. I simply followed her through the darkness until we reached a basement door at the end of a short hallway. She led me down an open staircase. At the bottom, just off to the right, was a small bedroom with two twin beds and an old dresser covered in framed photographs and little porcelain decorations. We went straight into the room and climbed onto one of the beds. Maybe 15 minutes later, I was already dressed and ready to leave. My nerves had never completely settled, and I kept imagining headlights pulling into the driveway or someone unlocking the front door. She was moving around the room, gathering her clothes, straightening the blankets, and carefully putting the pillows back the way she remembered them. Eventually, she switched on a small lamp sitting on the dresser. For the first time, I could actually see the room. While I waited, I looked over the photographs and decorations. Then, for no particular reason, I glanced through the open doorway. There was a man standing beside the staircase. My entire body froze. He was only a few feet away, tall and perfectly still. For one terrible second, I thought we had been caught. My stomach dropped, and my mind started racing through excuses. Then, he vanished. Not walked away, not stepped behind the stairs. He simply disappeared. I blinked hard and stared at the empty space, expecting him to return. What I had seen wasn't completely solid. It looked like the outline of a man formed from a faint blue-gray haze. I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. Finally, I said, very quietly, "I think I just saw someone." She stopped getting dressed and looked at me. "Someone? I think it was a ghost." She didn't believe me. She had been inside that house countless times and had never experienced anything strange. I didn't argue with her. I just told her we needed to leave. She finished fixing the room while I waited at the bottom of the stairs. Once the lamp went out, the basement became completely dark again. Every second felt longer than the last. Eventually, we climbed the stairs, crossed the kitchen, and put our shoes back on. We stood side by side at the rear entrance. The moment I reached for the doorknob, the wooden door swung open. Neither of us had touched it. At first, I thought someone was entering the house. but the glass storm door behind it was still closed and latched. There was nobody outside. We looked at each other. She knew she hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't opened it. And suddenly, the figure I had seen downstairs didn't seem so impossible to her anymore. We ran. She pulled the back door shut, and we sprinted down the driveway to my car. I drove away without looking back. Neither of us spoke until we reached the parking lot where she had left her car earlier that evening. I put the car in park and asked her, "Did you touch that door?" She shook her head. "No." Then I asked the only other question I had. "What was that?" She had no answer. It has been almost 20 years since that night. We've only talked about it a few times, and it took me a long while before I was willing to enter that house again. We had gone there searching for a little privacy. Instead, something in that house seemed determined to let us know we were not alone. I used to work as a paramedic, although I left the service not too long ago. This happened during my first year after qualifying. My crewmate and I were called to a young man in his early 20s who had gone into severe anaphylactic shock. One of his friends had already used an adrenaline injector, but it hadn't been enough. By the time we arrived, his breathing was dangerously slow and shallow. We inserted an airway device, lifted him from the roadside onto the stretcher, and rushed him into the ambulance. Less than 2 minutes into the journey, his heart stopped. I stayed at his head, managing his airway, while my crewmate worked on getting intravenous access. A second ambulance crew had joined us, so one paramedic began chest compressions while the other tracked the timings and passed equipment. We worked on him for what felt like an eternity, although it was probably closer to 10 minutes. Then we checked the monitor and saw a rhythm. His heart had started beating again. He still wasn't breathing properly, so I kept ventilating him with the bag. For a few minutes, everything was focused and controlled. We were still fighting, but there was a small sense that perhaps we had pulled him back. Then his eyes suddenly opened. He stared directly at me. It wasn't the confused look you sometimes see when someone regains consciousness. His gaze was fixed and intense, as though he was looking through me or beyond me. One of his arms shot upward, reaching towards something that none of us could see. Then he began trying to scream around the airway device. We removed it as quickly as we safely could. The sound he made afterward has never left me. It wasn't simply a cry of pain. It was raw, overwhelming terror. He sounded completely petrified, as though he had awakened into the middle of something unbearable. For perhaps 20 or 30 seconds, he screamed and reached out, his whole body consumed by fear. Then, just as suddenly, his heart stopped again. We immediately resumed resuscitation, but this time we couldn't bring him back. We continued all the way to the hospital, where his death was confirmed. I know there could have been a medical explanation for what happened. His brain had been deprived of oxygen. His body had gone through an unimaginable trauma. I understand that. But understanding those possibilities has never erased the memory. He was around my age, and he was the first patient whose death felt deeply personal to me. I had been the last person he looked at. For a long time afterward, I kept seeing his eyes and hearing those screams. As a child, I had always been frightened of death. Becoming a paramedic had helped me make peace with it. I had started to believe that death could be quiet, gentle, even calm. That night shattered that belief. Afterward, comforting dying patients became much harder. I would hold their hands and tell them they weren't alone. I would reassure them that everything was going to be all right. But inside, that memory would begin playing again. His eyes opening, his hand reaching upward, that terrible fear in his voice. I began to feel dishonest, almost like a fraud. How could I promise peace when I had witnessed something that looked so frightening? I'm not claiming that he saw another world, or that his reaction proved what happens after death. I honestly don't know what he experienced. But in those final moments, it felt as though he had returned with a message he couldn't put into words. And whatever that message was, it terrified him. Quite frankly, I still struggle to comprehend it. That single call changed the way I think about dying, and it brought back fears I thought I had outgrown. I once believed that death would be peaceful. Now, when I imagine my own final moments, I can't help remembering his face. I work in hotel marketing now, but when I first joined the hotel, I was part of the front desk team. I used to work a lot of overnight shifts, and during those quiet hours, guests would sometimes come down to the lobby because they couldn't sleep. Some were lonely, some were restless after a long journey. Others simply wanted another human being nearby for a little while. Most of the time, I enjoyed talking with them. They would tell me about the places they had visited, the people they had met, or whatever happened to be keeping them awake. Those conversations made the long nights feel a little less empty. Of course, there were moments when it was difficult. I might be halfway through balancing the accounts or preparing the morning handover when a guest would begin a conversation that lasted 40 minutes. But that was part of working at the front desk. You learned how to listen warmly while still keeping one eye on the paperwork. One night, though, a guest told me something that made me forget about work completely. It was sometime after 2 in the morning. The lobby was almost silent, and I was finishing a report when a man came downstairs and stepped outside for some air. A few minutes later, he returned and asked whether I had a lighter. I handed him one, and, after a long pause, he began talking. His wife had died about 18 months earlier. They had been married for 11 years and had 4 children, all still quite young. Her death had been sudden. She had been feeling unwell for a while, but no one realized how serious it was until doctors discovered a tumor in her brain. By then, there was very little they could do. Their marriage had been arranged by their families when they were young. He told me he had accepted it willingly. He thought she was intelligent, spirited, and beautiful. He believed they could build a peaceful life together, and for many years, he believed they had. But shortly before she died, she asked him to sit beside her because she needed to tell him the truth. She confessed that before their marriage, she had been deeply in love with another man. Her family had refused to let them be together and had pressured her into marrying someone else. She had hoped that, with time, those feelings would disappear. She told her husband that she had tried to love him. She had tried to become the wife he believed she was. She cared for their home, raised their children, celebrated anniversaries, and stood beside him through all the ordinary seasons of life. But in her heart, she had never fully let go of the man she had loved before. A few years into the marriage, after their first child was born, she found him again. They began meeting in secret. The affair continued on and off for years, hidden behind the life she shared with her husband. The man sitting across from me said he had never known. Then, on her deathbed, she told him there was something even more painful. She wasn't certain that all 4 children were his. One child, possibly 2, might have been fathered by the other man. She said she couldn't die without confessing. She wanted to leave the world with an honest heart, even if that honesty broke his. She died only a few days later. And suddenly, he was grieving 2 different lives. He was grieving the wife he had lost, and he was grieving the marriage he had believed was real. Every memory had become a question. Every family photograph felt different. Even when he looked at his children, he found himself searching their faces for answers he was ashamed to want. His wife had never revealed the other man's identity. she took that secret with her. He told me he had never shared the story with anyone, not with his relatives, not with his closest friends, not even with the people who had tried to comfort him after the funeral. But that night, in a quiet hotel lobby, he told everything to a stranger holding a borrowed lighter. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't ask whether he planned to have the children tested. I didn't ask whether he hated his wife or whether he still loved her. I just listened. Maybe that was why he chose me. I knew nothing about his life, and by morning, we would probably never see each other again. I had no side to take and no judgment to offer. When he finally stopped speaking, he looked exhausted, but somehow lighter too. He thanked me, returned the lighter, and went back upstairs. I never learned what happened to him after that night, but I've never forgotten what he taught me. Sometimes, people aren't looking for advice. They aren't asking you to fix what has been broken. Sometimes the weight inside them has simply become too heavy, and for one quiet moment, they need someone willing to help them carry it. He just needed to be heard. I wrote this down a few days after it happened, so some parts are already starting to blur. But the feeling of it hasn't faded at all. I've always had a strange relationship with nightmares. I grew up loving horror, so most of the time, even when a dream scares me, part of me enjoys it. It feels like being trapped inside a private horror movie. But this one was different. This was the first nightmare I can remember where I didn't wake up when things became unbearable. It felt as though the dream was physically holding me down, forcing me to stay until it was finished with me. It began in the house where I grew up. I was standing in the basement, in the area where I used to play video games as a kid. The basement was divided into 2 rooms by a narrow doorway with no actual door. I knew this place immediately because I used to have the same nightmare about it over and over. In that old dream, I would hear someone speaking from the room on the other side. I could never understand what the voice was saying. I only knew it wanted me to come closer. And because I was a child, I always did. Waiting beyond the doorway was this swollen, misshapen thing. It was vaguely human, but only in the cruelest sense of the word. Its body was heavy and distorted, and it would simply stand there, watching me. It never spoke once I saw it. It would just begin chasing me. Every time I would run for the basement stairs. Every time I would feel it getting closer behind me. And every time I would wake before reaching the top. Except this time, I made it. I climbed onto the main floor and felt this enormous rush of relief. For some reason, I became convinced that I was awake. I remember looking around the house and thinking, it's over. I'm safe now. That safety lasted only a few seconds. Something appeared at the far end of the room. It looked more human than the creature in the basement, which somehow made it worse. It was unnaturally tall, with arms that hung almost to the floor. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as though it already knew there was nowhere I could go. I think it spoke to me, and I may have answered, but I can't remember the words. I only remember the certainty that it was coming for me. My first instinct was to run outside. I reached the front door and looked toward the trees behind the house. But those woods belonged to another nightmare I used to have as a child. The moment I saw them, I could feel that old dream waking up too. There were shapes moving between the trees. So I turned around. The only place left was my childhood bedroom. I ran upstairs, down the hallway, and into the room at the very end. I slammed the door behind me, climbed into bed, and pulled the blankets over my head. That bed had always been my safe place. In so many childhood nightmares, reaching it meant the dream was almost over. But then I heard something enter the room. At first, it was above me. Then it was beside me. Then it seemed to be everywhere. I kept my eyes shut beneath the covers. Somehow I knew it wanted me to look at it. I could feel the command pressing into my mind. Open your eyes. I resisted for as long as I could. Eventually my eyes opened. What I saw wasn't really a face. It was more like a nightmare's attempt to remember what a face should be. The creature leaned over me and placed one long hand beneath its jaw and the other over the top of its head. Then it pulled its mouth apart. Inside was another face. That second face was darker, older, and rotting. Its features looked crushed together, as though they had been buried for years and dug up alive. Then it screamed. I don't know how to describe that sound properly. It wasn't simply loud. It felt endless. It carried every kind of fear at once: grief, rage, pain, hunger. That was the moment when I should have woken up. I didn't. I threw myself sideways and rolled out of the bed, tangled in the blankets. I hit the floor hard, crawled into the hallway, and headed for my mother's bedroom. Even in the dream, I knew she was gone. But that room still felt like the safest place I had ever known. I crawled inside and shut the door. For a moment, it held. I went to the window and looked outside. The creatures from the woods were standing in the yard now. Some were between the trees. Others had come closer to the house. They were waiting in complete silence. There was no way out. And then, for one brief moment, I became aware that I was dreaming. I told myself, this is the safest room in the world. If I have to face this thing, I'm doing it here. I tried to hold on to that thought. I remembered my mother. I remembered being a child. I remembered what it felt like to believe that nothing could reach me as long as she was nearby. But the screaming continued outside the door. The wood began to bend inward. Then the door gave way. I hid inside the closet, curled up in the darkness, feeling smaller than I had felt in years. The creature entered the room. I heard it breathing. I heard its hands dragging along the walls. Every few seconds, it released another broken scream. It searched the room, but it never opened the closet. I still don't understand why. Maybe it was because that closet held good memories. That was where presents used to be hidden before birthdays and holidays. Maybe some part of my mind had turned it into another kind of shelter. Or maybe the creature simply chose to leave me there. Eventually, I heard it walk away. Not angrily, not defeated. It moved with the slow, heavy footsteps of an animal losing interest. Each step shook the floor until the sound finally disappeared. And then the nightmare released me. I woke up without knowing what had saved me. That's the part I keep thinking about. The dream gave me so many moments when I should have awakened. The basement, the stairs, the bedroom, the face, the screaming, the door breaking open. Any one of those should have been enough. But I remained trapped inside it, moving from one childhood fear to another until I reached the closet. I'm sure I've forgotten pieces. There may even be more of the dream that I haven't managed to remember yet. But the thing that stays with me is simple. I should have woken up 10 times over, and I didn't. I don't usually have nightmares where monsters are chasing me or anything like that. Mine tend to be frightening because they feel possible, almost ordinary, right up until everything goes wrong. The most disturbing one happened near the end of September 2017. In the dream, I was house-sitting a luxury apartment in Las Vegas for an older relative. They were supposedly away for several days, and somehow I understood that I had already spent almost the entire week alone inside the place. It was my last full day there, and I remember thinking, I've barely left this apartment. I should at least go see the city. They had left me some spending money, so I decided I might buy a few souvenirs, see a show, and maybe gamble a little, just for the experience. The apartment was near the Strip, at the top of a building that was around 15 stories tall. The penthouse had this unusual glass roof, almost like a pyramid. Inside, it was mostly one large room with a bed in the center, a television across from it, and a small kitchen and bathroom tucked behind a dividing wall. I left the building and walked toward an open-air shopping center across the road. The mall had 2 levels of stores built around a wide central courtyard. I had only been walking around for a few minutes when I heard a series of faint popping sounds from the other side of the courtyard. At first, I thought they were those tiny fireworks people throw on the ground. Then the sounds became louder. People started screaming. Everyone began running, and suddenly I understood what I was hearing. Gunshots. The shots were coming quickly, one after another. I could hear bullets striking the concrete near me, so I ran behind a thick pillar and pressed myself against it. Pieces of concrete and dust sprayed against my clothes. It didn't hurt, but it told me how close the bullets were landing. Right beside me was an electronics store with televisions playing in the window. One of the screens showed helicopter footage of the shopping center, and a banner at the bottom said there was an active shooter at a Las Vegas mall. That was the moment the dream became terrifyingly real. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. I told her where I was and said I was safe for the moment. I promised I would call again as soon as I knew what was happening. When I looked back at the television, the news footage had changed. The camera was focused on a tall, pale-colored hotel several blocks away. It had reflective golden windows and looked about 40 stories high. Near the upper floors, there was a large opening where one of the windows had been shattered. The reporters believed the shots were coming from there. The shooting stopped less than 10 minutes later. The silence afterward felt almost worse. Soon, heavily armed officers entered the shopping center. A voice came over the loudspeaker telling everyone to remain hidden until officers reached them. When they found me, they checked that I wasn't a threat and ordered me to leave through a designated emergency exit. I ran. All around me, people were crying, shouting names, calling relatives, and begging for help. There was blood across the pavement. I saw people lying motionless on the ground, but I didn't stop long enough to understand what I was seeing. By the time I reached the exit, it was dark outside. People wandered through the street in shock. Some were injured. Others were searching desperately for friends and family. A police officer asked where I was staying. When I told him about the penthouse, his expression changed immediately. He looked straight at me and said, "You need to come with me." We walked back toward the apartment building, and the entire area was surrounded by police vehicles. When we reached the penthouse, officers were everywhere. That was when I learned the shooter had used the apartment I had been staying in. He had fired through the glass before aiming at the people below. And I suddenly understood that if I had stayed inside that evening, I would have been the first person he encountered. That was when I woke up. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My heart was racing, and the whole dream still felt completely real. But after calming down, I told myself it was only a nightmare. A few days later, on October 1st, I began seeing messages online saying, "Pray for Las Vegas." I searched for the news and felt my stomach drop. A gunman had opened fire on an outdoor concert from a tall hotel with gold-tinted windows. He had been positioned high in the building, though not on the very top floor, and had used rapid-firing weapons. The attack itself lasted only a short time. The location in my dream had been different, and many details were not exact, but enough of them felt similar that it deeply unsettled me. Afterward, I had 2 or 3 more dreams involving mass shootings. For a while, I was terrified that they might happen too. I even wondered whether I should tell someone, although I had no idea what I could possibly say. Thankfully, none of those other dreams came true. Still, the first one stayed with me for a long time. And what has always bothered me is how such a devastating event can slowly fade from everyday conversation. Something that shattered so many lives seemed to disappear from public attention. I've never been able to forget the feeling of waking from that dream, seeing the news days later, and wondering how something imagined could feel so uncomfortably close to something real. When I was younger, I used to have these strange episodes where I would see things while I was completely awake. Most of the time, it happened in the basement of my childhood home, but my grandmother's house was where I felt truly afraid. There was this shadowy figure there. I can barely picture it clearly now, but I remember the feeling it gave me. Whenever I stayed overnight, I would sleep with my head buried under the covers. I kept doing that well into my teenage years, unless someone else was sleeping in the room with me. I have memories of the figure standing beside the bed, almost leaning over me. Once, I could have sworn something touched my feet through the blanket. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach tighten. Things also had a habit of disappearing in that house. Sometimes they would turn up in completely ordinary places, but other times, they would somehow end up in the basement. That basement was awful. It was dimly lit, full of deep corners, old shelves, and a narrow crawl space that nobody wanted to go near. There was always some explanation for why it felt unpleasant. Bad lighting, damp air, an old house settling. But none of those explanations captured the feeling of dread you got just walking past the basement door. And it was not only me. My mother avoided it. My grandmother avoided it. My older brothers would find excuses not to go down there. Years later, I finally talked to my cousins about the house, and every one of them remembered seeing dark figures moving through the rooms whenever they stayed there. They especially remembered the guest room across from the basement door. It had 3 narrow beds lined up along the walls, and somehow that room always felt colder than the rest of the house. Hearing that they had seen the same kinds of things made the whole place feel even more disturbing. My mother told me that every house my grandmother lived in seemed to have something strange about it. When my mother was young, she heard scratching inside the walls, footsteps crossing empty rooms, and the handle of her closet rattling in the middle of the night. My uncles later confirmed those stories without being prompted. The house where I grew up was unsettling too, although not in quite the same way. It sat deep in the woods, far enough from the road that nighttime felt completely black. There were 2 places inside that I hated most: my bedroom and the storage room directly beneath it. The storage room was built against the side of the hill, and one wall was basically packed earth hidden behind a thin layer of drywall. The door would tremble whenever someone walked past it, even when there was no breeze. I never went down that hallway alone. My mother's office was at the top of the basement stairs, and she later told me that she sometimes saw our old dog running down those steps long after he had died. She would catch the movement out of the corner of her eye, hear the familiar sound of paws, and turn just in time to see him disappear toward the basement. I only learned that recently. What makes it stranger is that something similar happened to me when I was a kid. We had adopted another dog who looked almost identical to the one we had lost. One afternoon, I was playing with her when I saw her run down the basement stairs. I followed her into the hallway and watched her disappear toward the storage room. The door was slightly open. The lights were off. There was no chance I was going inside, so I stood there and called her name. A moment later, she came bounding down the stairs behind me. She had never gone into the basement at all. We lived in that house for 13 years, so there are plenty of other stories I could tell. There was also a lot of sadness there. Illness, unexpected deaths, and stretches of terrible luck that seemed to arrive one after another. At the same time, it was a beautiful place to grow up. I loved the woods, the quiet, and the sense of freedom I had there. That is what makes my feelings about the house so complicated. Part of me remembers it fondly. Another part of me still believes something was wrong with it. When I was very small, my parents kept a playpen in the basement. These memories could have been dreams, but they have always felt real to me. Whenever my father stepped away for a moment, I remember strange shapes appearing nearby. I cannot clearly describe them. I only remember knowing that they were watching me. Our second dog, Snoopy, seemed uncomfortable in the house too. She was normally gentle and calm, but she rarely went near the basement stairs. Some nights, she would sit at the foot of my bed and growl toward an empty corner of the room. After we moved, she seemed lighter somehow, more relaxed. She still loved exploring the woods, but she stopped staring into empty rooms. I know memories can shift over time, especially childhood memories. Maybe some of these moments have ordinary explanations. Maybe fear filled in the details. But these are the things I remember, and they are also the things my family remembers. Whatever was inside those houses, real or imagined, none of us ever felt completely alone. When I was younger, I used to have these strange episodes where I would see things while I was completely awake. Most of the time, it happened in the basement of my childhood home, but my grandmother's house was where I felt truly afraid. There was this shadowy figure there. I can barely picture it clearly now, but I remember the feeling it gave me. Whenever I stayed overnight, I would sleep with my head buried under the covers. I kept doing that well into my teenage years, unless someone else was sleeping in the room with me. I have memories of the figure standing beside the bed, almost leaning over me. Once, I could have sworn something touched my feet through the blanket. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach tighten. Things also had a habit of disappearing in that house. Sometimes they would turn up in completely ordinary places, but other times they would somehow end up in the basement. That basement was awful. It was dimly lit, full of deep corners, old shelves, and a narrow crawl space that nobody wanted to go near. There was always some explanation for why it felt unpleasant. Bad lighting, damp air, an old house settling. But none of those explanations captured the feeling of dread you got just walking past the basement door. And it was not only me. My mother avoided it. My grandmother avoided it. My older brothers would find excuses not to go down there. Years later, I finally talked to my cousins about the house, and every one of them remembered seeing dark figures moving through the rooms whenever they stayed there. They especially remembered the guest room across from the basement door. It had 3 narrow beds lined up along the walls, and somehow that room always felt colder than the rest of the house. Hearing that they had seen the same kinds of things made the whole place feel even more disturbing. My mother told me that every house my grandmother lived in seemed to have something strange about it. When my mother was young, she heard scratching inside the walls, footsteps crossing empty rooms, and the handle of her closet rattling in the middle of the night. My uncles later confirmed those stories without being prompted. The house where I grew up was unsettling too, although not in quite the same way. It sat deep in the woods, far enough from the road that nighttime felt completely black. There were 2 places inside that I hated most: my bedroom and the storage room directly beneath it. The storage room was built against the side of the hill, and one wall was basically packed earth hidden behind a thin layer of drywall. The door would tremble whenever someone walked past it, even when there was no breeze. I never went down that hallway alone. My mother's office was at the top of the basement stairs, and she later told me that she sometimes saw our old dog running down those steps long after he had died. She would catch the movement out of the corner of her eye, hear the familiar sound of paws, and turn just in time to see him disappear toward the basement. I only learned that recently. What makes it stranger is that something similar happened to me when I was a kid. We had adopted another dog who looked almost identical to the one we had lost. One afternoon, I was playing with her when I saw her run down the basement stairs. I followed her into the hallway and watched her disappear toward the storage room. The door was slightly open. The lights were off. There was no chance I was going inside, so I stood there and called her name. A moment later, she came bounding down the stairs behind me. She had never gone into the basement at all. We lived in that house for 13 years, so there are plenty of other stories I could tell. There was also a lot of sadness there. Illness, unexpected deaths, and stretches of terrible luck that seemed to arrive one after another. At the same time, it was a beautiful place to grow up. I loved the woods, the quiet, and the sense of freedom I had there. That is what makes my feelings about the house so complicated. Part of me remembers it fondly. Another part of me still believes something was wrong with it. When I was very small, my parents kept a playpen in the basement. These memories could have been dreams, but they have always felt real to me. Whenever my father stepped away for a moment, I remember strange shapes appearing nearby. I cannot clearly describe them. I only remember knowing that they were watching me. Our second dog, Snoopy, seemed uncomfortable in the house too. She was normally gentle and calm, but she rarely went near the basement stairs. Some nights, she would sit at the foot of my bed and growl toward an empty corner of the room. After we moved, she seemed lighter somehow, more relaxed. She still loved exploring the woods, but she stopped staring into empty rooms. I know memories can shift over time, especially childhood memories. Maybe some of these moments have ordinary explanations. Maybe fear filled in the details. But these are the things I remember. And they are also the things my family remembers. Whatever was inside those houses, real or ashamed, none of us ever felt completely alone. Honestly, it sounds strange when I say it out loud, but this is one of those childhood memories that has never faded. When I was little, my family spent several years living in Cuenca, Ecuador, and later near Medellin, Colombia. My parents were missionaries, and my dad worked as a pastor, so we moved around quite a bit and visited churches in some very remote places. There were 7 of us in a small house, so my brothers and I all shared one bedroom. We had an old wooden bunk bed that creaked whenever anyone moved. My younger brother Benji slept on the top bunk. My older brother Eli and I shared the bottom mattress. We were only about 5 and 7, so we slept at opposite ends, with our feet pointing toward each other. One week, a church from back home sent us a care package filled with things that were difficult to find where we lived. Inside were snacks, books, and 2 little action figures with tiny shields and launchers. Eli immediately chose the green figure because green was his favorite color. I got the orange one. It was not exactly the color I wanted, but I was still thrilled to have it. That night, we brought the figures to bed with us. After the lights were out, Eli whispered, "Let's put them under our pillows, count to 10, pretend to sleep, and see what happens." It made perfect sense to us at the time. That is how childhood logic works. You invent a ritual, and somehow you are completely certain the universe will participate. So we placed the figures beneath our pillows. Together, we whispered from 1 to 10, closed our eyes for a moment, and then reached underneath. The orange figure was under Eli's pillow. The green one was under mine. We just stared at them. At first, I thought we had mixed them up before putting them away. Eli insisted we had not. I knew I had placed the orange figure beneath my own head. We were confused, but we were also excited. It felt less frightening than magical. So we tried it again. We put the figures back under our pillows, counted slowly to 10, and pretended to fall asleep. When I reached beneath my pillow, the orange figure was back. Eli had the green one again. I remember holding the toy close to the small nightlight near the foot of the bed, turning it over in my hand and checking every detail. Less than a minute earlier, I had been holding the other figure. We repeated the game 3 or 4 more times. Every single time, the figure switched places. Eventually, the bed started creaking so loudly that we became worried our parents would hear us. We stopped, tucked the toys beside us, and went to sleep. The following night, we tried the same thing again. Nothing happened. The figures stayed exactly where we put them. At the time, we were disappointed. Looking back, that was probably for the best. For one night, though, something happened that neither of us could explain. Eli and I did not talk about it for nearly 2 decades. Then, one day, the memory came up unexpectedly. I wondered whether he remembered it differently, or whether I had exaggerated parts of it over the years. But he described the same room, the same toys, the same whispered counting, and the same impossible switching. He still insists he never moved them, and honestly, I do not know how he could have. We were lying at opposite ends of the mattress. The figures were beneath our pillows, and that old bed made noise if someone so much as lifted an elbow. More than 30 years have passed, and we still do not have an explanation. That was not the only unusual thing I remember from those years. In the clay brick house where we lived, there was a narrow closet with a wooden door that never closed completely. Sometimes I would sit on the floor outside it and whisper through the crack. Something would whisper back. I never saw anyone inside. I was far too afraid to open the door. I would ask a question, wait several seconds, and then hear a child's voice answer from the darkness. We talked about ordinary things, video games, cartoon movies, flying carpets, and jungle adventures, the kinds of subjects children could discuss forever. But there was something wrong with the voice. I cannot explain what made it feel wrong. It sounded young, but not quite human. Familiar, yet empty somehow. Even then, I sensed that I should not step inside that closet. The churches we visited could be unsettling too. Many were hidden in mountain villages that could only be reached by rough roads and 4-wheel drive vehicles. Inside those little buildings, we sometimes heard tapping from within the walls. Footsteps crossed empty hallways. Voices seemed to speak from rooms where no one was standing. My father knows far more about those years than he has ever told us. Some of his stories involved violence, frightened villagers, police officers, and ceremonies he refuses to describe in detail. Life around us was already dangerous. There were kidnappings, drugs, and murders. Eventually, missionary families began receiving warnings that their children might be taken for ransom. My parents decided it was time to leave. Whenever I ask my father about that period, he rarely says much. He simply looks down for a moment and tells me, "We should never have stayed as long as we did." Somewhere in storage, we still have boxes filled with old home videotapes from those years. Part of me would love to watch them again. Another part of me is not sure what might be waiting in the background. So when someone tells me they remember speaking to a person who was not really there, or witnessing something that refuses to fit inside a logical explanation, I believe them. Not because I understand what happened. I believe them because, for one night in an old, creaking bed, I watched 2 little toy soldiers move through the darkness without anyone touching them. I've experienced sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember. I must have been 3 or 4 years old when it first started, and some of those nights are still among my earliest memories. When I was younger, it was usually simple. I'd wake up unable to move and see a shadow standing near the foot of my bed. But as I got older, especially once I reached high school, the episodes changed. They became more vivid, more violent, and much harder to explain. I started seeing hooded figures and these twisted, unnatural-looking beings. Sometimes it felt like I was being pulled from the bed. Other times, I'd wake up with scratches, bruises, or marks that looked like fingerprints. A few times, there were even small bite marks. These weren't things I imagined seeing in the dark. The marks were still there after I was fully awake. This continued until I was close to 30. I rarely told anyone the full story. Whenever I mentioned sleep paralysis to friends, they usually laughed it off or told me it was just a strange dream. I'd had episodes while staying at other people's houses, but I always tried to keep quiet. I didn't want anyone thinking I was unstable, and I definitely didn't want them to become afraid of being around me. Then there was the night my friend AJ stayed over. We'd spent most of the day playing video games, eating junk food, and talking about nothing important. Sometime after 2 in the morning, we finally decided to sleep. He took the spare bed across the room. Before I drifted off, I had that familiar feeling in my chest. It's hard to describe, but I always seemed to know when an episode was coming. I remember lying there and thinking, please don't let anything happen tonight, not while he's here. At some point during the night, I woke up completely frozen. There were 6 figures standing around my bed. They wore long, dark robes, and their faces were hidden beneath their hoods. They were chanting in low voices while their hands grabbed at my arms, shoulders, and legs. I could feel myself being pulled across the mattress, but I couldn't fight back. I could barely breathe. There was also this sharp pressure in my stomach, almost like something was being pushed into me. Inside my head, I kept repeating, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." At first, I couldn't force the words out. My mouth wouldn't move. I kept trying until I managed to turn my head slightly toward the other side of the room. That's when I saw AJ. He was sitting straight up in bed. His face had gone completely pale. His mouth was open, and he was staring directly at the figures around me. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't half asleep. He was awake, and he was watching everything happen. That frightened me more than the figures did. I kept fighting until I finally managed to speak the words out loud. The moment I did, everything changed. The figures were pulled backward toward the closet, almost as though a powerful gust had caught them. They disappeared through the closed doorway, and then the closet door slammed so hard that the sound echoed through the house. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. When I could finally move again, AJ was still sitting there, shaking. He kept asking me what had happened and what those things were. I had to whisper for him to calm down because I was afraid we'd wake everyone else in the house. Then he started describing what he had seen. He saw the robed figures surrounding my bed. He saw them pulling at me. He saw my body moving across the mattress even though I appeared unable to move on my own. He saw them vanish toward the closet, and he watched the door slam shut. He had seen exactly what I had seen. That was the first time anyone had ever witnessed one of my episodes from outside of it. Until then, part of me had always believed there had to be a neurological explanation. Maybe my brain was creating everything. Maybe the marks came from something I was doing in my sleep. But hearing someone else describe the same figures changed the way I understood all of it. AJ never stayed at my house again. Our friendship lasted a little while after that, but it slowly faded. He stopped calling as often. He always had an excuse when I invited him over, and eventually, we barely spoke at all. Before he left the next morning, he told me he didn't think he could ever sleep in that house again. He said he had never seen anything like what happened in that room. I couldn't blame him, but losing that friendship still hurt. He had been one of my closest friends. Not long afterward, he began struggling with drugs, and his life went in a difficult direction. I don't know whether that night had anything to do with it, and I would never claim that it did, but something in him seemed different afterward. As I got older and started dating more seriously, I became very careful about letting anyone stay overnight. Whenever I felt an episode coming, I would invent an excuse to get them to leave. I'd say a family member needed help, or that I had forgotten an early appointment. I wasn't trying to push them away. I was trying to protect them. I didn't want anyone else to see what AJ had seen. Years later, I lived with my former fiancée for nearly 6 years. She witnessed several things during that time, and some of those experiences were even more intense. That is a much longer story for another day. But when someone tells me they've started seeing the same things their partner sees, even though they've never experienced sleep paralysis themselves, I don't dismiss them. I believe them. Because there is a profound difference between waking from a terrifying experience and wondering whether your own mind created it, and turning your head to discover that someone else in the room is staring at the very same thing. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts or anything supernatural. Honestly, I thought most stories like that had a reasonable explanation hiding somewhere. That changed when I moved into my first apartment during college. Almost immediately, the place felt wrong. At night, I would get this strong feeling that someone was standing nearby, watching me. Whenever I turned my back to one of the hallways, I'd suddenly feel something rushing toward me, only to spin around and find nothing there. Sometimes while I was showering, I'd hear the front door open and close. Then footsteps would race down the hallway outside the bathroom. I lived alone, and every time I checked, the door was still locked. There was also a large dark stain on the kitchen floor. I tried cleaning it more than once, but it never really faded. For a while, I told myself the building was old. Pipes made noise. Floors creaked. My imagination was getting carried away. Then, one afternoon, I helped a neighbor move some furniture in his apartment. He lived in the same building, and his unit had almost the exact same layout as mine. When we reached his kitchen, I noticed something strange. In the spot where I had that stain, he had a built-in breakfast booth with a small wooden table. I remember joking, "Well, that's unfair. I guess my apartment got the budget version." I didn't think much about it after that. Nearly a year later, I was talking with a coworker named Marcus. We weren't close, and I had never told him about the things happening in my apartment. He asked where I lived, so I told him the name of the building. His expression changed immediately. He looked at me and said, "You know what happened there, right?" I laughed a little and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. Then he explained that years earlier, a man had died by suicide inside one of the apartments. According to Marcus, the man had been sitting at his kitchen table when it happened. He said it was on the top floor, in the first apartment on the right. My apartment. At first, I didn't believe him. I thought he was trying to scare me. But then, I realized something. Marcus didn't know about the footsteps. He didn't know about the feeling of being watched. He didn't know about the stain in the kitchen or the missing booth. When I went home that evening, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the floor. The stain suddenly looked different to me. I thought about the table that should have been there. I thought about every strange sound and every moment when I had felt something moving just beyond my sight. And for the first time, I truly believed that I wasn't alone in that apartment. The thought that frightened me most was that whatever was there might now know that I understood. My apartment had an unusual layout. The living room was completely separate from the rest of the unit, with its own heavy wooden door. The frame was solid, and the lock clicked firmly into place. That door didn't drift open. It had to be pushed. The night after Marcus told me the building's history, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the door closed and locked. I turned on the television, hoping the noise would calm me down. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep on the couch. Sometime later, a sound woke me. It was the living room door. I heard the handle move. Then came the slow, mechanical click of the lock being released. The door opened just a few inches. Beyond it was the dark hallway. I sat upright, convinced someone had broken into the apartment. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it. But no one came through the doorway. There was only silence. I stood and slowly moved toward the door. Every instinct in my body was telling me to stay back, but I needed to know what was there. I reached for the handle. Just as I began pulling the door open, something pale moved across the hallway. It looked like a thin cloud of white mist passing quickly from one side to the other. I threw the door open. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. The front door was still closed and locked. Every window was shut. The apartment was completely still. I just stood there, shaking, trying to understand how that heavy door had unlocked and opened by itself. That wasn't the last strange thing that happened in the apartment. There were more sounds, more shadows, and more moments I still can't explain. Maybe there was a logical reason for all of it. But after learning that someone's life had ended inside those walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. Not a person, exactly. More like an emotion so powerful that it had soaked into the floors, the doors, and the rooms themselves. Whatever remained in that apartment could move things. It knew I was there. And by the end, I think it knew that I was listening. I've learned that dementia can take so much from a person, but every now and then, love finds a tiny door that it can still walk through. My great-grandmother, Nana May, was an extraordinary woman. During World War II, when so many men were sent overseas, she became one of the first women hired as a welder by the Pennsylvania Railroad. She was a real-life Rosie the Riveter, tough enough to work in the rail yard and brave enough to rebuild her entire life. She left an abusive husband, took her children with her, and started over. At the railroad yard near Harrisburg, she met the man I grew up calling Pop Pop. The military had rejected him because of problems with his feet, so he stayed home and worked on the railroad. That was where their life together began. I was lucky enough to have Nana May in my life throughout most of my childhood. She loved me in a way that never left room for doubt. I knew it every single day, and honestly, I still feel it now. She always kept a new box of markers waiting for me. She encouraged every drawing, every strange little painting, every creative idea I had. During summer vacations, I would stay with her for weeks at a time. One summer, when she was already in her late 60s, she climbed down into a rocky creek bed with me because I wanted to find unusual stones to paint. That was who she was. She didn't just tell me my interests mattered. She climbed down into the dirt and helped me look. She also had a nickname for me. She called me her Miss America. Now, let me be honest. I was not anyone's idea of Miss America. I was a round-faced tomboy with a crooked bowl cut, scraped knees, and absolutely no interest in dresses. But Nana May refused to accept that version of reality. In her mind, I was beautiful, brilliant, and destined for a crown. Then Alzheimer's came, and slowly, the woman I knew began disappearing behind it. Eventually, our family moved her into a care home. It was a peaceful place, bright and well cared for, paid for in part by the railroad pension she had earned through all those years of hard work. Still, I struggled with whether I should visit. My dad warned me that it might be better to remember her as she had been. Strong, funny, energetic, and completely herself. I understood what he meant, but I also felt that after all the love she had given me, I owed her the courage to show up. So I went. When I entered her room, The curtains were partly closed, and she was asleep. I sat beside her and gently held her hand. After a while, she opened her eyes. The moment she saw me, she looked frightened. I can't blame her. I was a teenager by then, with dark eyeliner, tattoos, and long, twisted hair. To her, I must have looked like a stranger who had wandered into her room. But seeing fear in the eyes of someone who had always looked at me with such love nearly broke me. My voice was shaking, and I was trying desperately not to cry when I said, "Nana, it's me. I'm your Miss America." She stared at me for several long seconds. Not past me, not through me, into me. Then something in her expression softened. She sat up slightly, reached for my hand, and said, "Yes, you are." That was it. Just 4 words. But for that brief moment, she came back to me. I held her hand and told her how much I loved her. I fought the urge to collapse into tears because I wanted those few seconds to remain gentle and peaceful. Soon, she closed her eyes and fell asleep again. I left before she woke up, because I knew that if she opened her eyes a second time, she might not know me anymore. When I told my dad what had happened, he cried. Nana May never recognized another family member after that visit. It remains one of the most beautiful and painful moments of my life. I miss her every day. The little cabin she loved, the one she called her mountain house, is still in our family. It passed from her to Pop, then to my dad, and eventually to me. Someday, it will belong to my son. My husband and I chose to get married there because I wanted Nana May to feel close. Whenever I visit, I sleep in the room that used to be hers. Before the wedding, my parents arrived at the cabin ahead of me. When I walked into Nana May's room, there was a brand new box of markers waiting on the bed. And for one quiet moment, I felt like her Miss America all over again. Another story comes to mind. It wasn't exactly a deathbed confession, but it was one of the strangest and most unsettling things I ever experienced. For a while, I worked as a caregiver in a facility that provided hospice and memory care. On the unit where I was assigned, one of our residents was actively dying. That sounds harsh to say, but in that kind of work, it was a familiar part of the job. We never knew exactly when someone would pass. It could happen within minutes, or they might hold on for another day or two. That evening, her hospice nurse was there, along with several members of her family. The room was peaceful, she was comfortable, and the people who loved her were gathered around her. A few doors down lived another resident. I'll call her Dottie. Dottie was the oldest person in the building, somewhere around 103. There had been several occasions when we thought we were going to lose her, but somehow she always recovered. She was incredibly frail, yet stubbornly determined to remain. After dinner, I checked on the woman who was dying. She was still stable. The hospice nurse told me she believed the resident would probably pass sometime the next morning, though she reminded me that nobody could ever truly predict it. Then I went to help Dottie get ready for bed. Everything began normally. I helped her to the bathroom, cleaned her dentures, changed her into her nightgown, and listened as she chatted about little things. She had dementia, but she still enjoyed conversation, even when her thoughts wandered. We were walking from the bathroom toward her bed when she suddenly stopped speaking. Her entire expression changed. She stared directly at the edge of the bed, as though someone were sitting there, waiting for her. Her eyes became bright and excited, and for a moment, she seemed to forget I was even in the room. Then she smiled. "Oh, my dear friend," she said, "you finally came. Should I bring anything for the journey?" She paused. Not an empty pause either. She looked like she was listening carefully to someone answering her. Slowly, The happiness faded from her face. "Oh," she whispered, "I understand." She listened again. "Are you certain? You can't take me with you tonight?" Another silence. Her shoulders sank. "You're not here for me?" She waited, then asked softly, "But you'll come back, won't you? You promise you won't forget?" After another moment, she gave a sad little nod. "Well, I suppose you should go then. Perhaps next time there will be a place for me." Her eyes moved upward, following something I couldn't see. Then they shifted across the room, tracking it as though it had risen from the bed and was walking toward the door. As it seemed to pass beside us, Dottie tilted her head back and said, "I love you too. I'll see you soon." Then, just like that, she blinked and looked at me again. The brightness was gone. She seemed tired and disappointed. I gently asked, "Are you all right? Are you ready to get into bed?" She nodded and said sleep sounded nice. Once I had tucked her in, she looked at me and asked, "Did you see him?" I said, "No. Maybe your visitor didn't want me to." She considered that for a moment, then nodded. "That's probably true. You're much too young for him to show himself to you." I asked her who she had been talking to. She gave me a small laugh, almost as though the answer should have been obvious. "That was Death," she said. "I don't know what else to call him. The name makes him sound frightening, but he isn't frightening at all." Then she glanced toward the doorway. "He visits sometimes, but he never comes for me. He keeps saying he'll return when the time is right." Her voice grew quieter. "He came for someone else tonight. Someone farther down the hall." Then she looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes. "Why couldn't he take me too? Why must I wait so long? I'm so tired." I stayed with her for another minute, wished her good night, and left the room. Then I hurried down the hallway to check on the woman who had been actively dying. When I entered, the room was completely still. Her family told me she had taken her final breath only a few minutes earlier. I want to share two strange experiences that happened to me personally. I still don't know whether they were paranormal, sleep-related, or something else entirely. Maybe someone listening has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of them. The first happened a little over 2 years ago. I was 22 and looking after my parents' house while they were away on a 3-week trip. I was the youngest of 3 siblings and the only one who still stayed there regularly, so being alone in the house wasn't unusual for me. I had watched it for days at a time before without any problems. Honestly, I was happy to do it. I was a broke university student. My parents were paying me, and I got the whole house to myself. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. About 6 days into their trip, I woke up early one morning. It must have been around 7:30 because sunlight was already slipping through the edges of my sleep mask. I wasn't fully asleep anymore, but I wasn't ready to get up either. I remember lying on my side, facing the open edge of the bed, trying to drift off again. Then I heard a man's voice. It was incredibly close to me, almost as though someone had crouched beside the bed and leaned toward my face. He whispered a name. Not mine exactly, but close enough that, in that moment, I believed he was speaking directly to me. The whisper began quietly and became sharper and more urgent toward the end. Then it stopped. It only happened once. I froze. My first thought was that someone had broken into the house and found me sleeping. The voice hadn't sounded distant or dreamlike. It sounded real. It felt as though whoever had spoken was only inches away. I stayed completely still beneath the covers, listening for footsteps, breathing, a door closing, anything at all. But the house was silent. It took me several minutes to gather enough courage to pull off my sleep mask. There was no one beside the bed, no one in the room. I checked the hallway, the doors, and every room in the house, but nothing had been disturbed. I've tried to convince myself that it was just one of those sounds your brain creates when you're between sleeping and waking. But what still bothers me is the feeling that came with it. The room suddenly felt heavy and deeply wrong, as though something unfriendly had been standing beside me. The second experience happened roughly a year later, during my final year at university. I was living in an apartment-style dorm with a roommate. By then, I had been there for a couple of months and knew all the normal sounds of the building: the elevator humming outside our unit, pipes shifting in the walls, doors closing down the hall, and the air conditioning system switching on and off. My bedroom was also naturally noisy. The air conditioning unit was inside a utility closet, and I usually slept with an air purifier and a standing fan running. With all three going, I could barely hear my roommate calling from the living room. That detail matters because of what happened one night. It was sometime after 3 in the morning when I woke up beneath my sleep mask. At first, I didn't know what had disturbed me. Then I heard it. Bare feet were walking across the small section of tile near my bathroom and vanity. They sounded wet. Each step made a soft, sticky slap against the floor. The footsteps moved slowly from the bathroom toward the utility closet, stopped, and then turned back. A few moments later, they started again. Back and forth. Sometimes they seemed to come closer to my bed before retreating toward the bathroom. I lay there completely rigid, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. I kept thinking that someone had entered my room, but I couldn't understand how they had gotten inside, or why they were silently pacing around with wet feet. This went on for several minutes. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. I waited a little longer before reaching for the remote beside my pillow and switching on the lights. The room was empty. The bathroom floor was dry. The closet door was closed. My bedroom door was still locked from the inside. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. Over the next 10 days, I heard the same wet footsteps several more times. It always happened in the early morning, and the sound always came from the same tiled area between the bathroom and the air conditioning closet. Sometimes there were only 3 or 4 steps. Other nights, the pacing continued long enough that I found myself counting each pass across the floor. Every time I turned on the lights, there was nothing there. Eventually, I became desperate enough to sprinkle a thin line of salt in front of the bedroom door, the bathroom entrance, the closet, and the window. I had no idea whether that would actually help. I just needed to feel as though I was doing something. A few nights later, the footsteps stopped. I never heard them again. I'm grateful for that, but I still think about both experiences. In each one, I was awakened by something that sounded impossibly close. Both times, I felt the same intense sense of dread before I even understood what I was hearing. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were vivid auditory hallucinations caused by waking suddenly. But part of me still wonders whether the whisper in my parents' house and the footsteps in my dorm were somehow connected. Whatever they were, I hope I never hear either of them again. Hey, I want to share some stories with you. Stories that have haunted me in one way or another. They're not just spooky tales, but experiences that have shaped how I see the world and what lingers just beyond our sight. So, grab a cup of tea, maybe a blanket, and let me take you through these moments. First, let me tell you about the house I grew up in. I'm from a place where history clings to every stone and corner. Our family home isn't just any house. It's a place with over 2 centuries of layered stories. The property was once a complex of several buildings, but the part we lived in was modest, just 2 tiny rooms, barely enough space for a tall person like me to lie down comfortably. There was a small, rickety shack for a toilet beside the rooms, and a well right there in the yard. Now, here's the eerie part. The house was right next to an old graveyard. One of the original rooms had a window that faced the graveyard, and if you opened it, the graves were just 2 feet away. Imagine that. The resting places of the long gone just inches from where we lived. No one really knows how old the buildings originally are or what they were first used for, but after some digging through local history and land records, I found out the land was once part of a royal estate. Since then, it changed hands a couple of times before my grandparents bought it, not quite 100 years ago. There's some conflicting info. Some say it was a taxation office back in the 1700s, then a trader owned it, though I couldn't find much about him. My grandpa was involved in the independence movement of our country, and the place became a hub for secret resistance meetings held in the various buildings. Because of that, my grandparents lived in those small rooms on the side of the complex. There are old legends that a lot of people were killed on the property during the royal times. Tax evaders, they say. My grandma told me these stories, but I don't know how much is true. Around the 60s, the graveyard was moved for reasons unknown, and the area around our home was redeveloped. Grandpa expanded the house, incorporating the old structures, more rooms, better toilets. He also bought adjacent plots and built a wall around the property. One chilling event. One day, they found a dead body floating in the well. Someone had jumped the wall and taken their own life there. They pulled the body out, cleaned the well, and kept using it for water. In the 70s, during a communist uprising, violence struck the area. Someone was stabbed to death inside our house, and even the house was bombed. People were killed in the other buildings too. After things settled, my grandparents built a new house next to the old one, right on land that used to be part of the graveyard. That's the backdrop. Now for my own story. Since I was a toddler, I saw a lady around the house. I'd talk to her, but when anyone asked who, I'd point and say, "There she is." But no one else could see her. My grandma saw a lady in one of the other buildings, and my parents and even guests have reported seeing people around the house. But I'll tell you what happened to me. When I was about 5 or 6, one night the power went out. When it came back on, I saw a shadowy figure, humanoid but with a fox-like tail, climbing the stairs. I remember that image so clearly even now. After that, I got a fever and was sick for days. That was probably the start of my horror. At 12 or 13, a friend came over and saw something that scared her so badly, she never talked to me again. The feeling in the house was always weird, like someone was watching us, footsteps on the stairs. But nothing else happened to me for a while. But then, when I was about 15 or 16, I began having vivid dreams about a girl wearing glasses. We'd talk on the roof of our house, and she'd tell me about herself. These dreams repeated every night. At the same time, my school crush used to visit me. One night after she left, she woke up hearing a voice calling her name from a tree near her house. When she looked out, she saw someone hanging from that tree. She was terrified, and soon after, she moved away. Then, one evening around that time, I saw the girl from my dreams standing outside my room. She called my name, then turned and vanished. I was alone in the house with my mom, and the front door was locked. No one else had seen her leave, and my mom saw and heard her too, but couldn't find where she went. After that, my dreams of her stopped, but new problems started. I saw that fox-tailed shadow again, and soon after, someone in the house died. The atmosphere became heavy and uneasy. For weeks, no one felt safe, but eventually, things calmed down. Since then, I've had strange dreams and nightmares almost every night, mostly about ghosts. Even now, people still see things around the house. Now, here's another story from my college days. I moved away from home to study in India and rented a house with 7 friends. It had 2 floors. The ground floor was locked and off-limits, and upstairs had 2 bedrooms and a windowless storage room. The house shared walls and terrace with neighbors, so at night, we'd often hear footsteps. We thought it was neighbors, but deep down, we felt something was off. We had stray puppies that came around, and one night, while my friends went out for tea, I stayed back to finish an assignment. After they left, I heard footsteps but ignored them. One of the pups came upstairs, but instead of coming in, he sat outside my door, howling. I got goosebumps and my heart raced. I called him, but he wouldn't come in. That howl sent me into survival mode. I bolted out of the house and didn't look back until I found my friends. They laughed it off, but I knew something was wrong. Another friend experienced sleep paralysis. He said an old, scary lady sat on his chest, and he couldn't move or speak. Another friend saw him struggling and woke him up. We didn't know about sleep paralysis then. It was terrifying. Last night, my friend and I wanted to get scared, so we went to the woods with flashlights and a knife. We turned off the flashlights to feel the full chill. We stood there, the silence broken only by our breaths, and felt like we were being watched. The feeling was overwhelming, so we left. Later, we hung out near our houses on a dark street bordering the woods. That same eerie feeling came back. We looked into the woods and noticed one patch was pitch black while the rest was faintly visible. Suddenly, we heard footsteps, crunching leaves, twigs snapping. The silence felt deafening, and dread wrapped around us like a shroud. Without a word, we sprinted away, but I glanced back and saw a girl in a white gown where the darkness was darkest. She had no body, just a gray aura outlining her shape. We ran to my house, unable to express the terror we felt. I'm staying far from those woods for a while. Let me take you back to the spring of 1977. When I was 5, my mom's friend Vicky invited us to spend the weekend at her house. Vicky's house was relatively new, not the typical haunted-looking place. But Vicky herself wasn't very nice to us kids, always on edge like we'd break something. In her basement, there was a hanging wicker chair, one of those half-basket styles popular back then. I was sitting carefully in it, not wanting to give Vicky a reason to scold me. Suddenly, the chain holding the chair broke and it fell forward, trapping me inside like a cage. At the exact moment I hit the floor, the stereo blared on at full volume. I screamed for my mom. She and Vicky rushed down, freed me, and Vicky shut off the stereo. Then Vicky started yelling at me for breaking the chair and messing with the stereo, but my mom told her to stop. We left soon after I calmed down. To this day, I remember that terror, the chair falling and the stereo blasting. Years later, when I told my mom, she recalled the incident and believed I couldn't have caused it all in the split second between the stereo turning on and me screaming. She thought Vicky was just mean, and after that, we never went back. Something in that house didn't like me, and it wasn't just Vicky. Finally, I want to tell you about a bed in my family home where strange things happen. Since childhood, I shared a room with my sisters. We had 2 beds, a queen size and a regular double bed. Before I had my own room, I shared the double bed with my oldest sister. As a kid, I saw dark figures and heard whispering under the bed, but I was scared and imaginative, so I wasn't sure if it was real. Fast forward to now, my middle sister uses the room alone and sleeps on the queen bed. I recently stayed in that room while she was away and slept on the double bed. Even though it's my longtime home, I felt an eerie presence in the room, like I wasn't alone. Several nights I woke up feeling something was beside me, though I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I'd turn on the light multiple times to check, shut the balcony doors and windows to calm down. The dreams I had on that bed were horrible. Visions of being pulled into the wall and trapped alive, deaths of people I knew, and even my own death. I'm used to dreaming a lot, so I brushed it off. Then my sister came back and told me she'd experienced something strange too. While on the bigger bed, talking to her fiancé, she felt something tugging at her blanket repeatedly. She told him she thought something was in the room. After praying, she went back to her regular bed, and nothing happened. She's been having terrible dreams on that bed as well. One night, my mom saw her sleeping in a twisted, uncomfortable position. When she woke up, her wrist was burning with pain so severe she had to bandage it, like a sprain. It was as if something had hurt her while she slept. I don't know what's with that bed, but I'm torn. Should I confront whatever is there, shout it out, or try other ways? I'm not scared exactly, but I don't want to invite any violent encounters. These stories, these moments, they're threads in a tapestry of shadows and whispers, places where the past bleeds into the present. Sometimes I wonder if it's a curse or just history refusing to fade. But they remind me that some things, some feelings, are harder to explain than simply seeing or hearing. Thanks for listening. If you ever feel a chill or a shadow flicker at the edge of your vision, maybe you'll remember these tales and know you're not alone. You know, this story has stayed with me for nearly a decade now, and honestly, I still can't wrap my head around what happened that night without leaning towards something, well, paranormal. It was a summer evening, about 8 years ago, and the clock was creeping toward 3 a.m. I was driving home after hanging out with some friends, and I was giving a lift to one of them. Let's call him Mark. We were both pretty hungry, so Mark invited me inside his house to grab a bite. We warmed up some pizza in the oven, ate, and spent a while just chatting about life and random things. The house was quiet except for our voices and the faint hum of the fridge. After some time, around 4 a.m., I got ready to leave. Mark and I stood near the entrance, in this small, cozy hallway that smelled faintly of old wood and something like lavender air freshener. He had his back to the door, and I was facing him, about 1.5 meters away. Right beside me, his cat, this sleek, curious thing, was weaving between my legs as we talked about her antics. Mark was sharing stories about her odd behaviors, how she'd sometimes just stare at nothing, and we were both laughing when, suddenly, our conversation was cut off by something unexpected. Something passed between us. At first, I thought it might have been the cat, but no, this was different. There was this faint, dull noise, like something brushing softly against the wall, or a piece of wood sliding. We both froze instantly, that sudden, sharp sense of awareness taking over. The kind of moment when the air feels thicker and your heartbeat sounds unusually loud in your ears. We stood there, perfectly still, as silence stretched out between us. Finally, I broke it, trying to keep my voice steady and neutral. Mark, tell me what you just saw. He looked at me, eyes wide, and said he saw a figure, a person, passing between us. What he described matched exactly what I had seen, and that was when I knew it wasn't just my imagination. This figure was dark, like a shadow, but you could see right through it. It was tall, taller than both of us, because when it moved past, its upper body was definitely higher than Mark's head. I remember clearly the shape, the profile of a person, maybe a woman. I could make out the forehead, nose, lips, chin, neck, and even the chest. But below that, the body just faded away, as if it didn't have legs or feet. It was just an upper torso, floating smoothly from my right side to my left, moving a bit faster than a normal walking pace, but the head stayed perfectly still. No bobbing as you'd expect from someone walking. Mark mentioned something else that caught our attention. The blue comb sitting on a shelf to my left. He said it had moved slightly, which must have caused that dull noise we heard when the shadow passed between us. The next morning, Mark's brother, who had woken up earlier, told him he'd seen a ghost in the kitchen. Now, I don't know how much to trust that, since we didn't get many details, but it added a strange layer to the whole experience. We never really investigated further, and nothing else strange happened in the house after that night. What's hard for me to explain is that we were two independent witnesses, standing in different spots, but both seeing the same thing pass right between us. All the lights in the house were on. We weren't near any windows or doors that could have let shadows creep in. The door was closed tight. So the idea of it being some kind of trick of light or shadow just doesn't sit right with me. I also distinctly remember seeing Mark's face through that shadowy figure, like it was transparent, so it couldn't have been a power flicker or anything dimming the lights. To this day, I have no solid explanation. It remains this eerie, beautiful, and unsettling moment, a glimpse of something beyond what we usually perceive. And while I sometimes wish I could forget it, part of me is grateful for that strange, shared encounter in the middle of a quiet summer night. Hey, I want to share a story with you, one that stayed with me since I was a kid. It's about my best friend, Marco, and the monster in his life. Not the kind you read about in fairy tales, but the kind hiding in the shadows of a place that's supposed to be safe. Home. Marco lived just a block away from me, in a part of the city where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks were cracked. It wasn't a neighborhood most people wanted to spend time in, but somehow, my parents had a way of keeping me out of trouble. Marco's parents weren't as lucky. When Marco went to school, his clothes were often stained or torn, and the teachers, tired of his tough attitude, usually just sent him out of the classroom or to detention. People started avoiding him, except for me and his little sister, Candy. We'd been friends since first grade, connected over the kind of silly things kids bond over, shared snacks, a secret handshake, that sort of thing. But what really held us together was knowing what Marco's life was like at home. Most people didn't know, or maybe they just didn't want to know. His mom was a kind woman when she was awake, and not caught up in whatever she was addicted to at the time. His dad was almost never home, but when he was, nobody was safe. Marco's dad was involved with a gang, and the fear he cast over their house was something I only understood more clearly as I got older. I remember hearing about a woman who had tried to help the family. She called social services, but then she turned up dead, and the whole case disappeared. No one dared to stand up to Marco's father. He didn't care about his kids like a dad should. He just saw them as a way to get government money. And if Marco's mom had more kids, well, that just meant more money. One afternoon, when my parents weren't home, the phone rang. It was Marco, and I could hear his parents fighting in the background, a low, angry rumble behind his whispered voice. "Can you come over, please?" he asked, barely above a whisper, afraid he'd be caught. Marco never outright asked for help, so I knew it was serious. I grabbed my bike and pedaled as fast as I could to his place. I left my bike hidden in the tall grass between our houses and crept to his bedroom window, the one he usually sneaked out of. It was dark, silent. Not a good sign. Before I could knock, the window slid open and a bag was tossed out, nearly hitting me. Marco leaned out, surprised I got there so fast. "We're leaving," he said, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know where we'll go, but we have to get out of here." I felt a lump in my throat, but tried to stay calm. At least I could get them to stay at my place for a while. I half joked about telling my aunt and uncle to take them in, but deep down, I knew it was complicated, maybe even illegal. "Candy won't leave without her bunny," Marco told me. "If she has a meltdown, it'll be all over. But she's always been good with you." That explained why he called me. I climbed in through the window, and we listened carefully for sounds from downstairs, knowing that if his dad caught us, things would go very badly. Candy, only 5, had tear-streaked cheeks. She clung to my arm, her little hand trembling. "Where's her bunny?" I whispered. Candy's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Mommy has Bun-Bun," she said softly, almost too scared to say it. My heart sank. Their mom was usually passed out on the couch when his dad was home. From what I'd heard over the phone, they were both inside. If the dad was still there, we couldn't risk Candy screaming for her bunny. We had to be quiet. "Maybe we can check," I suggested, swallowing my fear. Marco hesitated but nodded. We crept down the filthy hallway, Candy between us, holding both our hands. The stench in the kitchen made me gag, a mix of spoiled food and smoke. I knew Marco tried to keep things clean, but it was way too much for a kid his age. Suddenly, voices stopped us cold. Marco's eyes met mine, and in that silent moment, we decided to press on, just to peek inside the living room. There she was, Marco's mom, slumped on the couch, needles and drug paraphernalia scattered on the coffee table. It was the first time I'd actually seen it up close, and it broke something inside me. Beside her stood Marco's dad, red-faced and furious, arguing with a man I didn't recognize. Candy's pink bunny lay on the floor, just out of reach. The other man's voice was sharp and angry. "So you don't have my product or the money to replace it?" he growled. Marco's dad shouted back, blaming his wife for taking everything. The other man scowled, kicking an empty can. "Take her," Marco's dad said suddenly. "She can work it off. She's done it before. Might teach her a lesson." My skin crawled. I didn't understand all the details then, but I knew it was horrible. Candy let out a small cry, and we quickly hushed her, clutching her tightly. The man wasn't convinced. He threatened Marco's dad, demanding the rest of what was owed. Suddenly, Marco's dad froze, his face draining of color. Behind the man, a new figure appeared, tall, slender, and utterly terrifying, but strangely elegant. This creature had a human-like form, but with black hooves, a long snout filled with sharp teeth, and eyes hidden beneath flowing dark hair. He wore a white dress shirt, partly unbuttoned, and a long tail flicked behind him lazily. The man seemed angry the woman had died so quickly. Marco and Candy had just lost their mother, though Candy was too young to fully understand it. I held her close, tears welling up in my eyes. The man ordered the creature to take care of Marco's dad and search the house. Marco's dad tried to plead for his kids, but the creature moved with lightning speed. One moment, Marco's dad was standing there. The next, he was dragged out of sight behind the couch, a horrible scream trailing after him. Candy broke down, crying loudly, drawing the attention of the man, who crushed his cigarette on the carpet and lunged after us. We ran, but the creature was faster, blocking our way. It scooped us up effortlessly, carrying us back to the living room. Instead of harm, we were placed before the man who looked at us like we were nothing more than merchandise. Marco, ever brave, stood between his sister and this nightmare. I was frozen, shaking, unable to do anything but watch. "At least this trip wasn't a waste," the man muttered. "We can sell these 3 and make back what I lost. I should have taken them a year ago with their mother." I couldn't believe this was real. Monsters weren't supposed to be real, but here we were, trapped in a room with one. The dark creature behind us suddenly spoke, his voice calm but edged with amusement. "Selling children? I didn't think you'd stoop so low." The man snapped at him, anger creeping in. The creature reminded him of their old contract, the one where the man let the creature eat anyone he permitted. But now, the creature said, he was canceling the contract. Before we could react, the creature grabbed the man by the throat, lifting him off the ground. The sickening sound of his neck breaking filled the room. We all trembled, Candy wailing softly. Then, the creature did something unexpected. He cleaned Candy's tear-streaked face with the sleeve of his shirt, soaked warm in the sink. His voice was gentle as he scolded humanity for letting children suffer. "Humans are so distasteful," he said softly. "Letting children rot away in places like this, then trying to sell them? How has your race come this far?" He picked up Candy and bounced her gently, comforting her like a child. Marco and I watched, mouths slightly open, confused by this strange kindness after witnessing such horror. He asked our names and listened carefully, then pondered how long humans typically live. "I can last 100 years without eating," he finally said, "so 3 days without food should be manageable. Now, do you have somewhere to stay? I need to arrange human identities for you. A Lewis won't do as a name here." Marco was quick to ask if a Lewis would teach him how to be strong enough to protect Candy. The creature promised they'd protect her together. He asked me to take Marco and Candy in for a few days while he sorted things out, and promised he'd come back for them. Candy, surprisingly, smiled at a Lewis and asked if he really meant it. He nodded, a strange smile on his terrifying face. We left the house that night, Candy without her beloved bunny, which Lewis persuaded her to leave with their mother to keep her happy. The ride back was quiet, the weight of everything pressing down on us. My parents never asked what happened, giving us space to process. The weekend passed in a blur of silence and unease. Then Monday came. We were in my room when there was a knock at the door. Peeking down the stairs, we saw 2 police officers and a dark-haired man being led into our living room by my parents. We waited, unsure, but ready to face whatever was coming next. I want to tell you about something that happened while my friend Mara and I were on a road trip. We had been driving for hours, and by the time we finally stopped at a hotel for the night, it was close to midnight. We were tired, a little wired from the road, and honestly just grateful to have a bed. But as soon as we walked into the room, both of us got this uneasy feeling. The room was on the ground floor, and it had 2 doors. One opened into the hallway, and the other opened straight outside toward the parking lot. That alone already made me feel a little exposed. When we came in through the hallway door, the bathroom was on the right, and this open closet area was on the left. The room had one of those swing bar security latches on the door, but the part it was supposed to hook into was broken. The little catch plate was missing. We still swung the bar across anyway, even though it did not really lock anything properly. I guess it just made us feel slightly better. There was still a key card lock, so we told ourselves it was fine. After we settled in, we got into the same bed and stayed up late playing games on our phones. It was around 2:30 in the morning by then. All the lights were off, the TV was off, and the room had that strange, heavy quiet that hotel rooms get in the middle of the night. Earlier, we had each taken a small edible. Nothing intense, just 10 milligrams each. We had done that plenty of times before, and neither of us felt out of control or anything, just a little relaxed. While we were playing, Mara made some joke about how creepy the hotel felt. Then she glanced toward the front door, near the bathroom and closet area. I looked too, and I saw something standing there. At first, I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself it was just shadows, or my eyes adjusting, or my brain filling in shapes because the room was dark. But I could not stop staring. It looked like a tall white figure standing in the doorway area near the closet. It was not exactly clear, because I am nearsighted and did not have my glasses on, but I could make out enough. It had this long head and very long arms. It did not feel like I was looking at a normal person. That was what scared me most. I kept telling myself, no, that is nothing. That is just your mind being weird. So I looked back down at my phone and tried to keep playing. Then Mara said, kind of joking, kind of not, "Do you also see the person standing over there?" My stomach dropped. I looked at her and realized she was scared too. She turned on her phone flashlight and pointed it toward the closet and doorway. The figure disappeared. Then she turned the flashlight off, and it was there again. That was when we turned on the bedside lamp. We both started talking at once, trying to explain what we had seen without feeding each other details. Mara said it looked to her like someone wearing a long, oversized white hotel robe. I said it looked tall and pale, with strange long limbs and a dark, stretched-out face. Before we went too far into describing it, we both decided to draw what we saw, separately, just to see if we were imagining the same thing. When we compared the drawings, they matched. Both of us drew this opaque white figure, a little taller than the clothes rod in the closet, with long arms and a long, shadowy face. Mara does not really believe in ghosts or anything like that, but even she said it did not look transparent. She said it looked like someone was actually standing there. And that was exactly how it looked to me, too. We tried to be logical. We talked about every possible explanation. Maybe it was light from the hallway. Maybe it was shadows. Maybe it was the edible, even though neither of us felt very high. Maybe our brains had both turned the same random shapes into the same figure somehow. Then Mara suggested I put on her glasses and we turned the lights off again, just to check. I did not want to do it, but I also wanted proof that it was nothing. So I put on her glasses. We turned the lights off and waited for our eyes to adjust. This time, I saw nothing. I could see clearly into the closet. I could see the pole, the hangers, the wall. There was no figure there. But somehow that made me feel worse. Because it did not feel like, great, nothing was ever there. It felt like something was there, and now it moved. We turned the lights back on, and Mara said she did not see anything either. The figure was completely gone. That scared both of us even more, because we had both seen it before, and now we both saw nothing. After a while, we calmed each other down. We kept repeating that it was probably our eyes playing tricks on us. Eventually, we turned the lights off again and went back to our game, mostly because we did not know what else to do. But then I started seeing something from the corner of my eye. It looked like that same figure was peeking out from the left side of the doorway, near the bathroom. I tried so hard to ignore it. I told myself, "You are scared now, so your brain is looking for it. Do not give it power." Then Mara laughed nervously and said, "I know this is probably just my eyes, but I keep seeing something peeking its head out from the bathroom area." I do not think I have ever felt fear like that in my life. I told her, "I see it too." And we both completely lost it. Again, we tried to reason through it. We blamed the edible. We blamed the dark. We blamed the hotel lighting. We blamed tiredness. We blamed anything that sounded more normal than what it felt like. At one point, I got enough courage to check the whole room. I looked around the bathroom, the closet, near the doors, everywhere. There was nothing there. Eventually, somehow, we fell asleep around 3:30 in the morning. The next morning, we packed up and left as fast as we could. While we were driving away, Mara casually said something about me leaving the room during the night. I was confused because I had not left the room at all. She said the swing bar latch on the hallway door was open in the morning, and she assumed I had gotten up and opened it. But I did not. I know I did not. And I watched her close it the night before. She swore she had not touched it after that. So we were left with this horrible little detail that neither of us could explain. I still do not know what we saw in that room. Maybe it was our minds playing tricks on us. Maybe it was the dark, the tiredness, and the weird layout of the room all mixing together. But part of me keeps thinking about that white shape by the closet, and the way it disappeared when the light hit it. and the way we both saw it, and the latch being open in the morning. I have tried to make it make sense, but honestly, I still cannot. I've always believed there's more around us than we can explain. I know some people hear that and immediately brush it off, and that's okay. But for me, it started when I was young. When I was around 10 or 11, my family moved into this tall, narrow, 3-story house. The bottom floor had a couple of bedrooms, a bathroom, the laundry area, and this storage space that always felt a little too quiet. The main living room and kitchen were on the second floor, and the top floor had the other bedrooms. I hated the bottom floor. There was this L-shaped staircase that led up to the living room. You'd go up a few steps, turn sharply to the right, and then climb the rest of the way. Every time I made that turn, I felt something behind me. Not just "I'm scared of the dark" kind of behind me. It felt like pressure, almost like a hand gripping the back of my spine. Years later, I mentioned it to my dad, and he told me everyone in the house had felt it too. So it wasn't just me being a nervous kid. At first, my room was downstairs because my younger brother and sister were put upstairs closer to my parents. One of the first nights in that room, there was a thunderstorm. I had this nightmare where every flash of lightning lit up my floor, and it was covered in skulls. I woke up screaming so loudly that my parents came running down from the top floor. That house was also where I first saw what I can only describe as shadow people. One time, I saw the outline of a person move across the living room wall, like someone had walked past outside. But when I looked out toward the sidewalk, there was nobody there. I even went outside to check. Nothing. After that, even in other homes, I would occasionally see shadows that didn't make sense. Now, I'm in my 30s. A couple of years ago, I had a serious concussion, and about a month after that, the dreams started. They were these strange, looping dreams where I would wake up in my bed, in a place that looked almost exactly like where I actually lived. Sometimes nothing unusual happened. I'd get up, walk around, and everything felt normal. Then I'd wake up again, only it wasn't real. It was another dream layered underneath the first one. But every so often, I'd wake up in the dream needing to go to the bathroom. I'd get to my bedroom door, and then I'd freeze. There would be this black, static-looking mass standing there. I started thinking of it as the entity because I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't shaped clearly, but it felt aware. Heavy. Wrong. The worst part was waking up for real afterward and not being sure I was actually awake. I'd have to ground myself, touch things, look around, and convince myself that this time I was really back. For a while, maybe 6 months or so, I didn't see it again. Then the dreams returned. This time, I didn't even make it out of bed before I saw the entity. It was standing in the bedroom doorway. My partner was beside me in the dreams, and I remember trying desperately to move toward her, trying to wake her up or get her attention. But I couldn't move properly. I was frozen with fear, and in the dream, my body started convulsing, almost like I was having a seizure. When I woke up, I asked my partner if I had been shaking in real life. She said no. It was only happening inside the dream. Another stretch of months passed, and then it came back again. This time, the entity was closer. It changed positions each time. Once, I woke up in the dream and instantly knew it was behind me. I couldn't see it at first, but I could hear this strange TV static sound. I could feel this energy coming from it, like the air itself had gone electric. Another time, I rolled over expecting to see my partner beside me, and instead, the entity was there. That was when I started realizing, inside the dreams, that I was dreaming. I'd look around for something that felt real, something familiar that could help me figure it out. And whenever I finally understood that I was still dreaming, the dream would snap shut and I'd wake up again. Except most of the time, that was just another dream. The cycle kept going, but I got better at breaking it. Then, more recently, it changed again. This time felt much more intense. I was in bed, and the entity wasn't just standing nearby anymore. It felt like it was controlling my body. I don't know if I'd call it possession. It didn't feel exactly like that. It felt more like something outside of me was trying to move me, like it had its hands on invisible strings. I'm not a religious person, but in the dream, I started praying. I was making the sign of the cross over my chest, over and over. In one of the loops, my partner woke up in the dream and saw what was happening, and she started praying with me. That one felt painfully real. There was also a little girl in one of the dreams. She walked into our room and asked if we could be her parents. Then she climbed into bed between us. After that, the entity appeared exactly where she had been lying, pinning me down from that spot. And then, dream after dream, it kept happening. Sometimes I wouldn't see the entity at all. Other times, it would slowly line itself up with my body, almost overlaying itself on top of me, until it felt like it was completely covering me. I don't really know what to do with all of this. I've seen other people talk about experiences like mine. Some have gone to mediums or searched for answers in spiritual places. But I live in a small, rural community, and we don't really have access to much like that. The only mediums who come through are traveling ones, and that's rare. I've also started wondering whether I need to take this more seriously, because each time it comes back, it seems closer, more active, more personal. I may try checking the local library, even though it's small, just to see if there are any books that mention something like this black static entity. I don't know what I expect to find, but I feel like I need to look somewhere. I hope I explained it clearly enough, because honestly, I don't know whether this is something paranormal, something tied to the concussion, or something else entirely. I just know that when it happens, it feels real. And every time it comes back, it feels like it knows exactly where to find me. You know, I still remember this one Holi from last year. It started so casually, the way these things usually do. 3 of us friends made a plan that day. We thought, let's try bong. 2 of my friends called me over to one of their flats in Model Town, Delhi. And honestly, at that point, it felt like just another random college-type plan. The flat was on the first floor, right on the corner of a road. The owners, an elderly couple, lived upstairs on the second floor. My friend, let's call him Rashan, was living there with a few roommates. He was from Bihar, a college guy, and the flat had this strange layout. There were 4 rooms. One room faced the main road, another room was opposite it, and that second one had this dark, heavy vibe. Everyone kind of treated it like the haunted room. Then there was the kitchen, and next to the kitchen were 2 more rooms. One balcony room was empty, and the other was used by his working roommates. Before drinking the bong, we decided to cook something. My friends had tried it before, so they said, "Bang ke baad bhook lagti hai, pehle kuch kha lete hai." So we made toddy. Earlier that evening, we had already cooked pasta and eaten, so I was pretty full. But still, we made the toddy, and then they started preparing the bong. We drank it, and within maybe 10 minutes, I could feel it hitting me. Then they ordered some snacks, and even though I had eaten already, suddenly I was unbelievably hungry. I finished 3 full packets of chips by myself. After that, the first phase started. The laughing phase. There was no joke, nothing funny, no reason at all. We would just look at each other's faces and burst out laughing. It felt endless and stupid and kind of beautiful at first. Then the second phase came. Fear. And that was where everything changed. For a moment, I felt like my soul had come out of my body. I could see myself lying on the bed, completely still, like I was looking at someone else. Then suddenly I felt like I came back into my body, and I started thinking about my life. I genuinely believed I had died. I kept asking my friends, how do I get normal again? How do I reduce this effect? But my thoughts were running so fast that I couldn't control them. I got really scared. I kept asking one of Rashawn's roommates what to do, but even he seemed high on something, so nothing was making sense. After that, things became blurry. I remember going to the bathroom, then coming back to the room. Everyone was sitting down to eat, and all of us were completely gone in our own heads. At one point, I started calling myself Satan and laughing, but inside, I was terrified. Then I began seeing this dark aura around the room. It felt like something was pulling me toward the hall. My mind became louder and louder, and somehow I ended up standing near that haunted room again. I asked the roommate one more time, "Bhai, bhang ka effect kaise kam hoga?" He said, "Bas so ja, full sleep le, normal ho jayega." But I refused. I don't know why. I just broke down crying there, without any proper reason. Then suddenly, I started shouting at everyone, loudly, angrily, like something inside me had snapped. After that, I vomited in the hall. My friends somehow handled me and took me to my room so I could sleep. For a while, I slept. I thought maybe things were getting normal, but then the dream came. I saw a girl in a room. I had never seen her before in my life. She came close to me, and then somehow, in the dream, I became her. It felt like I was living through her. Then there was a man, and he started harassing me. I started screaming for help, calling out to my friends. They actually came running because I was shouting in real life too. But when I saw them, I thought they were the men from my dream. I started fighting them. They had to pour water on me to bring me back to reality. After that, I didn't speak to either of them. I just lay down again and tried not to think about anything. I tried to keep my mind completely empty and forced myself to sleep. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up. Both of them were sleeping. The flat was quiet in that strange, early morning way. I cleaned the floor, gathered myself, and went back home. I thought that was the end of it, but that evening, Rashawn called me, and what he told me made everything feel much heavier. He said strange things had been happening in that flat for the past month. He had experienced sleep paralysis. He had seen a black orb in the corner of a room. His family had visited for a week, and one night, his brother slept alone in that haunted room. His brother apparently had some kind of psychic sensitivity, and he told them he had seen 4 members of a family inside the flat. According to him, they didn't want Rashawn to leave. They had some kind of attachment to him. His mother also felt things. She said near the hall and kitchen, it sometimes felt like a child was moving around, or like someone was watching her from behind. Then there was the dog incident. Their dog had somehow tangled its leash around the dining table in such a strange way that it looked like it was trying to hurt itself. That scared everyone badly. A few days later, Rashawn found out something about the flat. He heard that a girl had once hanged herself there, in the same room where he had been living. He told me he had felt dark energy from the first day he moved in, but he kept ignoring it. After that, he went to stay with another friend for a few days, just for moral support. One night, both of them were watching a movie, and they saw a girl standing in the corner of the room. Both of them saw her. That was the night they finally decided to leave the flat. Hey there. I want to share something personal with you. A story from when I was a teenager that still lingers in my mind. Back when I was 16, I attended English classes where people of all ages gathered to improve their skills. I was the typical nice girl, always polite and friendly, even when I felt uneasy around someone. I had one close friend my age, a girl named Jessamine, who was quite popular and often introduced me to new people. One day, I noticed a man in her group. He was about 34, very talkative, always smiling. From the very start, something about him made me uncomfortable. He would stare at me during group conversations, as if he was focusing only on me. I tried to brush it off, but over time, he began waiting outside my classroom door to talk, asking about my friendship with Jessamine, my school, my family. It felt odd because he was much older, and I couldn't understand why he was so interested. I felt guilty for feeling uneasy, thinking maybe I was just being mean. I forced myself to respond, making small talk. He claimed to be close with Jessamine, which made me feel a little safer. But when I asked Jessamine about him, she admitted she didn't really know him well and thought he was just nice enough. Then came the calls from an unknown number. It was him, saying he got my number from Jessamine. I was upset and confronted Jessamine, who said he insisted until she agreed. He began calling me multiple times a day, wanting to chat, telling me he missed me. He shared personal details about his life, saying he felt he could talk to me because I was mature for my age. I didn't like it and started ignoring his calls. Then the messages started. They were strange, sometimes childish and full of emojis, wishing me a lovely day. Other times just saying things like, "You're so pretty, too pretty," or telling me I shouldn't have a boyfriend or he'd get mad. I showed the messages to Jessamine and told her I didn't want any contact with him anymore. She promised to help. I changed my routine, arriving late to class, leaving immediately after to avoid him. But I could feel his eyes on me, like it was some twisted game to make me uncomfortable. He stopped talking to Jessamine and others, but continued messaging me, saying, "I miss you," or "Why are you so busy?" Eventually, I blocked his number. I thought it was over, but one day, outside school, he appeared suddenly, smiling, asking why I wasn't answering. He invited me for coffee at his place. I said no and went inside, pretending to study until he left. He lingered for over an hour. Fear took hold. After that, he became more aggressive, mocking me in the halls, sending explicit messages on social media, commenting on my pictures. I blocked him everywhere but felt his gaze constantly. One day, as I walked home alone, a car pulled up next to me. It was him. He offered a ride, saying he knew where I lived. I said no and quickened my pace. He grew angry, his expression dark and menacing. I ran into a nearby shop and waited until he left. Terrified, I asked my mom to change my class, though I never told her why. I felt ashamed, like I was to blame. The semester ended without incident, and I hoped it was truly over. But 2 years later, when I started university, he returned. He created new social media accounts to message me, pretending nothing had happened. I blocked every account without responding. Then, one day, I saw him across the street from campus, watching me. I quickly caught a bus to avoid him. The following week, he showed up at the cafeteria, introducing himself to my friends as if we were old pals. I was frozen with fear. When I pulled him aside and asked him to leave me alone, his expression turned dark again. He said hurtful, twisted things, and I ran back to my friends in tears. After that, he disappeared from my life. I never saw him again. Even now, at 28, I think about him sometimes. I don't have social media anymore and avoid posting photos because I'm afraid he might see them. But sharing this with you today helps me remember that listening to our instincts and speaking out is important. If you ever feel that uneasy feeling, trust it. You don't have to face it alone. There's this night from my childhood that still sticks with me. I was around 11 back then. Now I'm 26, and it was late at night. I was downstairs watching TV with my mom and sisters. Eventually, everyone headed off to bed, leaving me alone in the living room. I was just starting to drift off when suddenly, there was this loud banging on our front door. I mean, someone was pounding like they really needed to get in. I froze, staring at the door, heart pounding. My dog, who usually barks at any noise, just laid quietly beside me, staring at the door too. That was odd. The banging went on for what felt like forever, maybe a minute or two in reality. When I finally moved a bit, my dog snapped out of it, gave me a quick look, and ran to the door. But still, no bark, just this confused head tilt. Summoning all my courage, I peeked through the blinds. There stood a young woman, probably in her early 20s, blonde hair tangled and messy, her white skin stained with blood. She was clutching her left breast. It was still attached, but she was holding it like she was trying to keep it from falling. Her shirt was torn, and she looked terrified. I was about to open the door when my mom suddenly appeared behind me, slamming her hand on the door and locking it back up. I hadn't even noticed her come down. It was like she brought me back to reality. The reality that you just don't open your door to strangers in the middle of the night. I looked up at her, eyes wide, maybe even tearing up a bit. She gently moved me away from the door and called out, "Who is it?" The woman shouted back that her boyfriend had beaten her and they lived in the apartments across the street. Now, we lived in a cul-de-sac with townhouses, and our place was at the very end. The apartments she pointed to were quite a distance away, which made me wonder even more. Mom asked her name. She said something like Bethany or Stephanie. I can't remember exactly. After a moment's hesitation, when she pleaded, "Please help me," Mom unlocked the door just a crack and stepped outside, keeping it mostly closed. I followed, keeping an eye on her. Bethany kept thanking my mom, asking if she could come inside because she was scared her boyfriend might come after her. But Mom explained she couldn't let her in. She had 4 kids to think about, but said she'd stay outside with her. She told me to grab the phone and call the police, which I did. Mom started asking for details, like the exact unit she lived in. Bethany pointed toward an apartment, gave a building number and unit letter. Not long after, a silver SUV pulled up. Bethany ran to it, yelling, "That's my sister!" and jumped in. The car sped off without a word from either of them. Mom looked at me, confused, and we went back inside, locking the door tight. We sat there for a while. I asked Mom about the police. She said she'd wait downstairs for them if I wanted to go to bed, but I was too scared to leave her alone. When the officers arrived, Mom told them everything. They said she did the right thing by not letting the woman in. Here's the weird part. My dog never barked once during all of this, only when the police knocked on the door. The officers mentioned there had been similar calls in the area recently. The next morning, when we drove past those apartments, the unit Bethany pointed to looked empty. No signs of anyone living there. No furniture, nothing. Her boyfriend never showed up, and we never saw Bethany or that SUV again. If you're out there, Bethany or Stephanie, I hope you're okay if that was real. But if it wasn't, well, please don't ever knock on my door again. I want to start by saying this story isn't exactly supernatural. Not in the full ghost story, lights flickering, chairs moving kind of way. It's not even really scary all the time. Some parts are honestly funny. But there was something about this dog, something in the way he moved and watched people, that stayed with me. My father worked on a cattle farm in Brazil, and he lived in a small house there. The place always had dogs around. Some were born on the farm, some wandered in from who knows where, and a few were given to my dad by people who couldn't keep them anymore. Most of them looked like regular, rural stray dogs, So the first time I visited and saw this huge black dog standing near the house, I was honestly shocked. His name was Heracles. He wasn't a pure Great Dane, at least I don't think so, but he was still massive. When he stood on his back legs, he was taller than me though. To be fair, I'm not very tall. He was mostly black, with white markings around his muzzle and chest, and he had this serious, almost ancient-looking face. Someone had given him to my father because they couldn't handle his size anymore. When he first arrived, he was thin and awkward-looking, but since it was a cattle farm, there was plenty of meat around. After a while, he filled out and looked healthy, almost majestic. The thing is, Heracles was not aggressive at all. He was calm around the other dogs, the cats, the chickens, even the horses. He never snapped or barked at everything like some farm dogs do. But he was strange. Unlike the other dogs, he spent most of his time inside the house. Maybe because he had been raised as a house dog before, or maybe because my dad worried he wouldn't do well outside. But honestly, another reason was that he was extremely hard to make leave. With the other dogs, you could wave your arms and say, "Go on, get out," and they would move. Heracles didn't care. He would just stand there and stare at you. Not growling, not threatening, just staring. And because he was so huge, nobody really wanted to physically drag him away. He looked too powerful, too heavy, too serious. My dad was the only one who could make him move without a whole dramatic scene. That staring was one of the creepiest things about him. He would walk up to you, look straight into your face with no expression at all, hold your gaze for a few seconds, and then simply walk away. No wagging tail, no obvious reason, no request for food or attention. Just a silent inspection, like he was checking whether you were still yourself. His body language was different from other dogs too. He didn't bounce around much. He didn't seem restless. He would stand completely still for long periods, almost statue-like. I know big dogs can be calmer than small dogs, but Heracles had a stillness that felt unusual. He also loved standing on his back legs. He would put his front paws on tables, counters, sofas, beds, anything solid enough to support him, and then he would look around the room from that height. And because of that habit, he learned one very impressive and very unsettling trick. He could open doors. He would stand upright, brace himself against the door, and use his paws to work the handle. During the day, it was funny. At night, it was a different story. One time, I was lying in bed in a dark room. The light outside the room was on, so the doorway had this pale glow around it. Suddenly, I heard the handle move and the door swing open loudly. And there he was. This giant black dog standing in the doorway, upright for a second, then dropping down onto all fours, just looking at me. The light behind him made him look enormous. His face had no expression at all. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, didn't come in for affection. He just stared. I'm not ashamed to say it scared me badly. After a few seconds, he turned around and left, like he had only come to check on something. Another time, I was in the bathroom watching something on my phone when I suddenly heard my sister scream. I ran out, and when I got to her room, Heracles was outside her door, trying to open it again and again. The handle kept rattling, and the door kept shaking. My sister thought it was me trying to get in, which somehow made it worse for her. I explained that it was just the dog. Then I grabbed Heracles gently by the front legs and walked him away. But just the dog didn't always feel like enough of an explanation. When he wasn't staring at people, he liked to stare at empty places. Fields, corners, tree lines, spots in the yard where there was nothing visible. He was also very quiet. He barely barked, which made him feel even more watchful. Because of all this, some people on the farm jokingly called him possessed. In Portuguese, they would say, possuído. I said it too, as a joke. But the joke came from the fact that people were genuinely creeped out by him. There was an older woman on the farm who especially disliked him. I never really understood what her job there was, but she was very much from the deep countryside, and she was more superstitious than the rest of us. Whenever Heracles got too close, she would complain and call him demon-like. I think she was half joking, half serious. And this is where the story becomes harder to explain. I don't strongly believe in the supernatural, at least not during the day, and not when I'm somewhere normal. But nighttime on that farm was different. The house felt isolated. The dark outside felt too large. Sometimes, inside that house at night, I had this low, constant feeling that something was watching. But when Heracles was inside, that feeling went away. I don't know why. Maybe because he was so huge. Maybe because he seemed so aware of everything. But part of me felt that if there was anything bad outside, anything strange or evil, Heracles would know before anyone else did. And more than that, I felt like he could deal with it. I remember telling my sister and cousin that, and they both agreed. We all had the same feeling. If something came into that house at night, Heracles would not be afraid of it. I also have vivid dreams, and Heracles started appearing in them often. Even when I wasn't at the farm, I would dream about him. And in the dreams, he behaved the same way he did in real life. Quiet, still, watching. Heracles passed away recently from old age, and that's one reason I wanted to tell this story. In a strange way, it feels like honoring him. But there is one last thing I think about a lot. When I was 17, I decided to walk Heracles on a leash through the wooded part of the farm. My dad used to do it, and as far as I know, I was the first person other than him to try. I wasn't weak. I had been lifting weights for years by then. But Heracles was unbelievably strong. Even small pulls from him dragged my feet through the dirt. I remember thinking, what kind of dog is this? He didn't walk like a normal dog either. He would move forward for a little while, then stop and stare at nothing, then move again, then stop again. I had walked other dogs in wooded areas before, but none of them behaved like that. I decided to let him choose where we went. He led me to a very isolated part of the farm. It was a wooded area full of old metal scraps, rotting wood, and abandoned machinery. There were rusted tractors, an old cargo truck, and a few broken-down cars. Nobody really went there because there were poisonous snakes around, and the whole place looked like something from a horror movie. Even during the day, it felt dim because of the trees. The scrap metal made it feel abandoned, almost apocalyptic. When Heracles got there, he started acting like he was patrolling. He walked quickly, then stopped and stared intensely at certain spots. The place was dead silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Then he reached one spot near one of the broken tractors, and he froze. He stared at that place for maybe 1 or 2 full minutes, completely still. It was the longest I had ever seen him stare at anything. I looked too, trying to see what he was seeing. An animal maybe, a snake, anything. But there was nothing there. Still, I felt something. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like we were both focused on the same invisible thing. Like he had brought me there for a reason, and I was supposed to understand. My heart started beating faster. Not because anything happened exactly, but because nothing happened. That was the strange part. The silence, the stare, the old tractor, the feeling in the air. Eventually, Heracles stopped staring and continued walking around the area. Since it was getting late, I pulled him back toward the house, which took some effort. Later, I found out that years before I was born, some bad things had happened on that farm. People had died there, which maybe isn't shocking because the farm was old. But one of the more recent deaths had been a tractor accident. I don't know which tractor it was. I don't know if it was the same place. But when I heard that, I immediately thought about Heracles standing still in that scrapyard, staring at that empty spot near the broken tractor. And I felt chills go down my spine. I worked with a woman not long ago. I'll call her Claire, though that isn't her real name. She came to me because she wanted to understand something that had been weighing on her heart. She noticed she carried a lot of judgment towards someone close to her, and no matter how much she tried to be kind or understanding, something inside her kept tightening. So I guided her into a deep, relaxed state, gently, step by step, until her conscious mind softened and she could access what was stored underneath. From there, she connected with her higher self, and her higher self began guiding us toward the deeper roots of the issue. She found herself in another lifetime. She was a young woman living in the countryside, sometime around the early 1930s. She was working on a farm, feeding animals, washing clothes, carrying buckets of water, doing whatever needed to be done. The farm belonged to an older man and his wife. They seemed respected in the community, very proper, very religious on the outside. But the landowner had been watching her. He became too familiar with her, too forceful, and one day he assaulted her. She became pregnant. When his wife discovered it, instead of facing the truth, she accused the young woman of dark magic. She said this girl had bewitched her husband. She said she was dangerous. And because the landowner and his wife had status, people believed them. No one listened to the young woman. No one protected her. She was locked in a cold stone room with iron cuffs around her wrists fixed to the wall. She cried, struggled, begged, and knew in her bones that she would not leave that place alive. And she didn't. But then something unexpected happened. As she left the body, she moved toward the light, but the light felt different from what she expected. She was met by 3 luminous beings. They were not angels exactly. They felt older than that, quieter than that, more like a council of light. And they told her something that was very difficult to understand. They said that love, in its purest form, is beautiful, caring, and free. But she had chosen a path where love would not always feel beautiful. She had chosen to learn how love can become tangled with pain, how trust can feel dangerous, how the heart can still open, even after it has every reason to close. They told her, "You are learning that love can hurt, and still you must learn to love from a higher place." At first, she couldn't understand why any soul would choose something like that. So they explained it more gently. They told her this lesson was not about accepting cruelty. It was not about pretending harm was okay. It was not about letting people continue to wound her. It was about releasing the human attachment to how love is supposed to look. They said, love from the soul. Love without needing another person to behave perfectly first. Love without making your peace depend on whether they change. Then she asked, "How do I do that?" And they told her to begin with the person she judged the most. They said, "Let go of your expectations. Let go of the story that the relationship had to be different for you to be free. Let go of the guilt. You did what you could with the understanding you had." Then she began recognizing the souls from that past life. The man who had violated her in that lifetime was the same soul as someone in this life who had manipulated her emotionally and played with her mind. And the wife who had accused her was the same soul as her son in this life. Her son was the person she carried so much guilt around, the person she never felt she had loved well enough, the person who made her feel, again and again, like she was failing. The council told her, "Release your judgment. Release your expectations. Accept them as they are and love them anyway. Not because their actions were right, not because they earned it, but because your soul came here to learn this." And that is what I would call an advanced soul lesson. Many people begin with foundational lessons, learning responsibility, caring for the body, not harming others, forgiving themselves, becoming honest, becoming steady. But some souls choose harder lessons. They choose to discover what love really is when the human heart wants to shut down, when the mind wants to judge, when the body wants to protect itself, when every instinct says, no more. And the lesson is not to become weak. It is to become free. So if this touches something in you, here is a simple meditation you can try. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed for about 15 minutes. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow breaths. Now imagine yourself standing in a wide field of golden light. Let that light surround you. Let it feel warm, safe, and steady, almost as if it is holding you. Bring to mind someone you judge, someone who hurt you, someone who disappointed you, someone you struggle to accept. Don't force forgiveness. Don't rush your heart. Just allow that person to stand in the golden light with you. Simply observe them. Then ask your higher self, what am I meant to learn from this relationship? Wait quietly. The answer may not come as words. It may come as a feeling, an image, a memory, or a sudden knowing. Be patient with it. And when you feel ready, imagine a white flame glowing in the center of your chest. This flame is your soul's love. Not human love with conditions. Not approval. Not permission. Just the light you are made from. Let the flame grow a little brighter. Then imagine small threads of that light moving gently from your heart toward the person in front of you. You are not saying what they did was okay. You are not excusing the pain. You are simply allowing your own light to flow again, without letting judgment block it. Stay there for a few minutes. Then take 3 deep breaths. Feel your body. Move your fingers and toes. And when you are ready, open your eyes. I hope this helps you look at forgiveness a little differently. And maybe, gently, you can ask yourself, who is the person your soul is learning to love without losing itself? Hey there, I want to share a story that's been with me for years now. One that's both unsettling and deeply personal. It all started about 25 years ago when I was looking for a place to rent with my 2 little girls. I met the previous tenant of this pretty run-down house, and she warned me. She was serious. Never to let a man live with us there, especially because of the dark presence that lingered in the house. At the time, I thought she might just be upset or exaggerating. After all, we needed a home, and I'd faced tough situations before. So I rented the place, only to realize later that her warnings were more than just stories. Picture this. Our bedroom was cozy but cramped. I slept on a full-sized bed pushed against one wall. My girls had a single bed on the opposite side, and nearby were the living room door, a closet, and a crib. Night after night, strange things happened. We'd see light flicker beneath the door, like someone was standing there, watching. But no one was ever there when we checked. Our dog would growl and scratch at the door, yet nothing was on the other side. Almost every morning around 6 a.m., the toilet lid would slam shut and the toilet would flush. But when we rushed in, the water was still and the lid was down. Sometimes old music played softly from the walls, even though the neighbors had moved out. Our home was filled with whispers and shadows that we couldn't explain. One night, the girls were so happy. They'd just received a package from my mom filled with princess toys, beach towels, and silky nightgowns. After their bath, they put on those nightgowns and begged to wear them to bed. I tucked them in, dimmed the lamp, and sat reading nearby. Then, the covers started to slide off them, again and again. At first, I thought maybe my oldest was just kicking them off, but when I looked closer, she was perfectly still. The covers moved as if pulled by invisible hands. My heart raced. I told whoever or whatever it was to stay away from my girls, but the covers were yanked from my grip, and my youngest daughter began screaming as if in pain. I threw myself over them, shouting for the presence to leave. We huddled together all night after that, and from then on, the girls never slept alone in that house again. There were times when I saw something. A little boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with sandy blonde hair and a gentle smile. I felt such sorrow and love from him, and I knew he'd suffered. Later, I learned that there might have been a tragic story of a boy who died there under terrible circumstances. I wish I could have helped him find peace. One day, after a grocery trip, I came home to find the front door locked, and my girls were terrified, clutching my shirt. We heard footsteps and a child running around, but no one was there. Then, I saw handprints fogged on the glass door. Crescent moons, just like a child's might leave. That image has stayed with me all these years. Living there was a challenge, filled with moments of fear and mystery, but also love and protection. I learned that sometimes the unseen world reaches out in ways we don't expect, and all we can do is hold on tight to those we love and stand strong. Thanks for listening to my story. Hey, I want to share some stories with you. Real experiences where things felt just off. You know that gut feeling you get when something's not right? These tales all have that vibe, and maybe you felt it too. First, there was a time I worked at this old theater, right? Beautiful place with history in every corner. But man, it felt haunted. There was this one seat in the balcony, always kept down, reserved for a ghost named Abigail. One day, while painting sets, I felt compelled to look up, and there she was, sitting quietly in Victorian clothes, watching the stage. She never threatened me. In fact, it felt comforting, like she appreciated the art and the energy. But it wasn't all friendly. The basement was a whole other story. Dark, musty, and full of shadows that played tricks on you. One time, the trapdoor slammed shut behind me, and I screamed. Turns out the ghost light bulb had gone out, that little light left on to welcome theater spirits. When it was fixed, the eerie feeling lifted. It reminded me how much we need to honor the past, even the unseen parts. Then there was the time I had a roommate who turned out to be, well, a little unhinged. We met through a listing, and at first, all seemed fine. But then he got weird about my boyfriend stopping by briefly, accusing me of being possessed. Yes, possessed. One day, I came back to find a wooden cross above my door and candles lit. All pretty creepy and offensive, especially since I'm a Christian. Needless to say, I moved out ASAP and learned to be cautious about who I let into my space. Another story. I lost my iPad at a hotel, and after some days, got a call from a man with broken English claiming he found it. The whole situation felt off. He knew my full name, even though I hadn't put it on the lost screen. He wanted to meet at night, asked for gas money, and refused to give details about himself. My husband and I went with the police to meet him, and thankfully, the iPad was recovered and he was taken into custody. It was a stark reminder of trusting our instincts and the importance of safety. There was also my mom's story. When she was young, traveling for work, she had an obsessed guy on a bus who ended up stalking her at the hotel. He even tied her door shut from the outside. She was terrified but managed to get help and escape. It's chilling how some people can cross lines and how vital it is to pay attention to warning signs. I recall a night at a 24-hour store where I was sitting in my car, and a guy in all black tried to open my back door. He then pointed to other cars nearby like to say, "I have a car, no need to worry." But after my boyfriend's car was stolen recently, that didn't reassure me. I left quickly, shaken, and now I always keep my guard up. There was a day I took a new bus route and was almost hit by a blue car that kept following me. The driver looked creepy, missing teeth, unkempt, and his persistence sent chills down my spine. I hid in a bakery until my bus came and ran like crazy when I got off. Even now, seeing blue cars gives me the jitters. When I was a kid, an elderly couple approached me at church, claiming to be my great-grandparents, and said my parents sent them to pick me up. It felt wrong. My mom later told me all my grandparents had passed away. When we went back to the door, the couple was gone. That memory stayed with me. Sometimes things don't add up. At one point, a neighbor started invading my privacy, staring into my windows, stealing my underwear, and tapping on my bathroom window while I showered. It messed with my peace of mind and made me fearful in my own home. I had to put up a note warning him about the law, and eventually he backed off. But the damage to my sense of safety lingered. There was also an unsettling night when I was at a hotel parking lot after an argument with my dad. A car with tinted windows parked right behind me, door slamming repeatedly, but no one ever got out. The car left, then came back and seemed to be watching me. My mom thought I was overreacting, but I knew something was off. That feeling is hard to shake. One more. An acquaintance from my school days, M, who had been mean and unpredictable, showed up unexpectedly and tried to stay overnight. When I said no, he faked a phone call to his mom to guilt me, but the line was disconnected. A trick. I got him out of my place as fast as I could. Years later, he tried contacting me again, but I blocked him. Sometimes, you just have to trust your gut and protect yourself. And lastly, there was the man at the dog park. He approached me, talking about a lost dog he found, but something about him didn't sit right. He was dressed oddly, overly friendly, and kept probing for personal info. My dog's growling confirmed my unease. When he followed me to my car, blocking my exit, I panicked until a park guard intervened. That man saved me. It was a stark lesson. Trust your instincts, even when the person seems harmless. So, all these stories, all these moments, they taught me to listen to that inner voice, to recognize when something feels wrong, and to act on it. Sometimes, the world gives us signs wrapped in subtle ways. Stay safe out there and trust yourself. Hey there. I want to share a story from a few years back when I moved to a smaller city to work as a paramedic. The city wasn't huge, maybe around 80,000 people, but it was rough around the edges because of the booming oil industry nearby. We worked 24-hour shifts with usually a handful of calls, so sometimes we got some decent rest during the night. One cold January night, my partner, who was an EMT basic named Mike, and I got called to a nearby town around 2 a.m. The dispatcher told us a neighbor downstairs heard someone screaming for help, but that was all the info we had. We headed there quickly with lights flashing. When we arrived, police and fire were already on scene, and the woman who called 911 was there too. She pointed us to the apartment where the screaming came from. At first, we tried knocking, but no one answered. The fire department was ready to force the door when the landlord showed up with a key. As we entered, the place was pitch black and smelled terrible. The kitchen and living room were buried under 5-foot piles of garbage and clutter, barely leaving a narrow path to walk through. The police went down the hallway toward the bathroom and bedroom. When one officer opened the bathroom door, he just stood there and said, "She's in here." I stepped inside first. The bathroom was strange. dimmed by a pale yellow light from an old-style bulb that gave off a weird, almost eerie feeling. The room was empty, except the sink was filled with dozens of makeup bottles, some leaking and spilling powders and liquids everywhere. Then I saw her. An elderly woman lying naked in the bathtub, curled up on her side with water nearly up to 8 inches. Her skin was pale, and her face was partly submerged. I checked for a pulse, but before I could get a good feel, she suddenly shot up like a wildcat, screaming and covering herself. Everyone else bolted out, leaving me standing there, stunned. I tried to calm her down, explaining who we were and why we came. She claimed she soaked every morning to ease joint pain and denied screaming or needing help. I asked about self-harm and mental health, but she was coherent and refused any care, so I had her sign a refusal form and left. As we stepped outside, I burst out laughing from the shock, and soon everyone was chuckling nervously. My partner later told me all he remembered was hearing me yell and sprint out. Fast forward about 3 months. I was working with a different partner, and we got a call for a welfare check on the same woman. As we pulled up, my heart sank. Same building, same nightmare. The officers explained that a friend at a nearby gas station hadn't seen her in weeks, and there was a strong, awful smell coming from the apartment. The landlord was unreachable, so we called fire to force entry again. Inside, the garbage was worse, and thousands of flies buzzed around. The smell hit us like a wall. An officer opened the bedroom door and motioned me over. There she was, lying on her back between 2 massive piles of trash, her body in an advanced state of decomposition. Her skin was paper-thin, blackened and peeling, with bones visible through the cracked flesh. Her eyes and lips were gone, replaced by crawling maggots. It was like something out of a horror movie. I had to catch myself from gagging. We suited up with protective gear and carefully cleared a space to move her. But as we lifted, the skin stuck to the carpet and peeled away from her body, revealing thousands of maggots underneath. It was heartbreaking and disturbing. We managed to place her in a body bag and took her to the funeral home as quickly as possible. Looking back, we think she passed away sometime shortly after that first visit, and that call might have been the last time anyone really saw her alive. It's a story that stuck with me, a reminder of the strange, sometimes tragic lives people lead, and the unexpected moments we encounter in this line of work. I need to tell you about something that happened, because I still don't really know what to do with it. Over the weekend, my boyfriend Mason and I went out driving through the back roads. Nothing fancy, just one of those long, dusty drives where you lose signal, the roads get quieter, and everything starts to feel a little removed from real life. And all day, before anything strange happened, I kept having these random images pop into my head. Not thoughts exactly, more like little flashes. I kept seeing a porcupine I'd seen years ago. Then I kept remembering this maned wolf pacing at a zoo from maybe 6 or 7 years back. And then there was this turtle shell pattern, but not a flat little pond turtle kind of shell. It was rounded, domed, almost like a tortoise. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I figured my brain was just digging through old memories for no reason. That happens, right? Then the weird little coincidences started. Mason and I were talking about Ford excursions because I need a new car, and he was telling me about them. They haven't made those things in forever, so he said he hardly ever sees them anymore. And then, out in the middle of nowhere, at this tiny country gas station, there one was. He was shocked. I didn't really understand how rare it was, so I just laughed it off. Coincidence. No big deal. Later, out of nowhere, Mason said, "You know, I like Australian accents." And I just kind of froze, because that same day I had been replaying this old conversation with my dad from maybe 15 years ago, where he said the exact same thing. Still, I tried not to make it into anything, but then I remembered the animals. I told Mason, "This is going to sound weird, but I keep thinking about a porcupine. I have this feeling we're going to see one." He was skeptical, which was fair. He'd never seen a wild porcupine before. About 15 minutes later, I saw one. I know I saw it. But Mason didn't. And because he didn't see it, I started doubting myself immediately. Maybe it wasn't a porcupine. Maybe I saw it wrong. Maybe I wanted to see it because I had just said it out loud. So I tried to let it go, even though I felt this strange little buzz in my chest. Then the maned wolf memory started shifting in my mind. It wasn't the zoo animal anymore. The image got smaller, grayer, sharper, and suddenly I was thinking, gray fox. I almost told Mason, "I think we're going to see a gray fox," but I stopped myself. I had already said the porcupine thing, and since he hadn't seen it, I didn't want to sound dramatic. So instead I asked, "Hey, what kind of predator animals live out here?" And I swear, before the sentence had even fully settled in the air, a gray fox ran straight across the road in front of us. Right in front of both of us. I was stunned. Not just surprised, stunned in that quiet internal way where your brain starts flipping through every possible explanation and none of them quite fit. I was also frustrated because I had felt it before it happened, but I hadn't said it clearly. And now it sounded like I was just claiming it after the fact. So again, I tried to talk myself down. Coincidence. Animals live out here. People see animals on back roads. That's normal. Then we left the deeper backcountry and drove into this little rural town. Suddenly Mason swerved hard. There, in the middle of the road, was a huge porcupine. Not off to the side, not hidden in brush. Right there. Big, unmistakable, impossible to miss. We both saw that one. And we just started laughing because what else do you do? The first porcupine was the one only I saw, the one I couldn't prove. And then here comes another one, practically standing in the road like, "Fine, is this clear enough?" By that point, I was completely rattled. So I told Mason, "Okay, I have one more image." I told him about the turtle shell. I said it had to be domed, not a regular flat-looking aquatic turtle, a turtle or tortoise with a rounded shell. After that, I kept looking around, but I also told him we couldn't force it. I said, "If it's going to happen, it'll make itself obvious. We won't have to squint and convince ourselves." For a while, nothing happened. Then I got distracted. I started telling him some old story, and I genuinely forgot about the turtle for a minute. And right then, clear as day, there was a turtle crossing the dirt path in front of us. Mason stopped the car. I got out to look, but within seconds it had crawled toward this dirt hole and blended in so perfectly that if we had been 10 seconds earlier or later, I don't think we would have noticed it at all. That's the part I keep coming back to. The timing. The order. The specifics. I didn't sit there naming every animal I could think of. I wasn't saying, maybe we'll see a deer, a raccoon, a bird, a fox, a turtle, a porcupine. It wasn't like that. It was porcupine first, then gray fox, then the domed-shelled turtle. And we saw them in that order. I'm a pretty grounded person. I want there to be a rational explanation. I want someone to tell me brains are pattern machines, coincidences happen, and rural roads are full of wildlife. I can accept that, but I also can't pretend it didn't feel strange. I've had coincidences before. I've had moments that felt too oddly timed to ignore. But this was the first time someone else was there with me. This was the first time I said part of it out loud before it happened. And now I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it's just my mind connecting dots after the fact. Maybe I noticed subtle things without realizing it, and my brain turned those signals into images. Maybe the world is simply stranger than we usually allow it to be. I don't know. All I know is that for one night, on those quiet back roads, it felt like my thoughts kept stepping out in front of the headlights. Hey, I want to share a story that stayed with me for over 2 decades now. About 20 years ago, my good friend, let's call him Mark, and his wife Linda were caring for Linda's dad, Felix. They took care of him completely, helping him every day, especially since he had some health challenges like incontinence. They really did an amazing job, and I always admired their dedication. One morning, Mark went to check on Felix as usual, but this time, Felix had passed away during the night. It was a tough moment. Back then, I worked helping families with cemetery arrangements, so I stepped in to help Mark and Linda prepare for Felix's final resting place. I didn't even take any commission. I just felt it was the right thing to do for them after everything they'd done for Felix. We held the service about a week later, and I was honored to officiate. It was a beautiful ceremony, filled with friends and family giving Felix the farewell he deserved. Afterward, we all rode back together in the limo provided by the funeral home, just sitting quietly and reflecting on everything. Then Linda noticed there was a message on their answering machine. Yeah, this was back in the days of landlines and answering machines. The timestamp on the message was exactly 11 a.m., the same time as Felix's graveside service. At first, we thought maybe someone who missed the service left a condolence message. But when we played it, every one of us just froze. There were 5 of us there: Mark, Linda, me, my brother James, and a neighbor friend. The background was noisy, like a room full of people talking, but then you could hear Felix's voice, clear as day. He said, "Please do not follow me." And then the message ended. We were all stunned. What could it mean? Was he warning us not to follow him into death? That didn't make sense. Maybe not to repeat his mistakes. He had a rough past, even a brief prison stay. But Linda always believed it meant one thing. Her dad was reaching out from beyond, asking her not to follow his path into darkness or despair after death. That moment, the silence, the shock, the chill in the room, it's as vivid to me now as it was then. To this day, I truly believe that message on the answering machine was Felix's way of making contact from the other side. What do you think about that? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I've had a few experiences in my life that I still can't fully explain, but this one stayed with me in a way nothing else ever has. And before I start, I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. You can believe in the paranormal, or you can think there's always a rational explanation. That's completely fine. I'm just telling you what I felt that day, because even now, years later, I remember it with frightening clarity. In my family, we've always been quite sensitive to things you can't really see. Some of us pick up on atmospheres very strongly. Sometimes we sense things before we understand them. Sometimes we feel presences. It sounds dramatic when I say it like that, but when you grow up with it and you learn how to protect yourself emotionally and spiritually, it just becomes part of your life. At the time, I was in my last year of high school. I was originally from Alsace, and if you know that region, you know how heavy its history can be. That year, our class went on a school trip to Struthof, the former concentration camp. So already, before even arriving, I knew it wasn't going to be an easy visit. It's the kind of place where the air feels different, quiet in a way that almost presses against you. We walked in with the group, and very quickly I noticed the gallows on the left. And honestly, from that moment, the whole atmosphere changed for me. That's when it started. All of a sudden, I felt something on my back. Not pain exactly, not at first. It felt like weight. The only way I can describe it is this. It felt as if I was carrying someone on my back. At first, I tried to brush it off. I thought, maybe I slept badly. Maybe I was tense. Maybe the place was affecting me emotionally and my body was reacting. I really did try to stay rational. But the more we walked, the more I understood that it didn't feel like ordinary back pain. It felt like someone. I had the very clear impression of a man. Someone extremely thin, fragile, exhausted. And the strange thing is, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anything aggressive from him. No anger, no threat, nothing like that. It felt more like he was tired, deeply tired. As the visit continued, though, the weight became harder to bear. My back started hurting for real, and I couldn't stop thinking that maybe this man was somehow still attached to that place. I know how that sounds, I really do. But in that moment, I had this overwhelming feeling that he was stuck there, and I kept thinking, maybe I can help him leave. Maybe that's why he came to me. At one point, I called my stepfather. He's a magnetizer, and he's always been very sensitive to these things too. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't say I thought it was a man. I didn't mention that I felt he was very thin. I only told him, since the beginning of the visit, I feel like I'm carrying something on my back. And he went quiet for a second. Then he told me, very calmly, that it could be a former prisoner. He said there was sometimes the presence of a very thin man there, someone who seemed to attach himself to certain visitors during the tour. He told me this man was tied to the land, to the place itself, and that leaving wasn't simple for him. The description matched exactly what I had been feeling, and I hadn't given him those details. That was the moment where I really struggled to stay composed, because I couldn't explain how he knew. During the visit, I even did something almost instinctive. You know that little movement you make when someone is on your back and they start slipping down, so you kind of lift them up again? I did that. And immediately, the weight became lighter. Not gone, just adjusted. It felt as if something had actually settled back into place. I know that sounds absurd, I know, but that is exactly what I felt. He stayed with me through the entire visit. After a while, I almost got used to the sensation, even though my back still hurt. I had this quiet feeling that there wasn't much more I could do, except let him stay there as long as he needed. Near the end, I was talking with a friend who also believed in these kinds of things. I had told her what was happening, so she was checking on me now and then. We were speaking normally when suddenly I stopped in the middle of a sentence. I froze, and then this huge wave of sadness came over me. A deep sadness mixed with guilt. Because in that exact moment, I knew he was gone. The weight had disappeared. My back didn't hurt anymore. I couldn't feel any presence. Nothing. I looked at my friend and said, "He's gone." But he didn't follow me out. And honestly, that broke my heart a little. I called my stepfather again right after, and I remember feeling so sad for that man. I had really hoped in some strange way that I could take him with me, that he could leave that place through me, or with me, or because of me. But it felt like he had only walked with me for a while, and then he had gone back to wherever he was still tied. To this day, it remains the most intense experience I've ever had. I'm not saying I know exactly what happened. I'm not claiming I have the truth. But I know what I felt that day, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. You know, growing up, I was really fortunate to be part of a close-knit family of 4. My brother and sister were actually living down in Australia at the time, so it was just the 3 of us in this old house that my parents bought. Now, I don't actually remember the very first place we lived in, but the second house? Oh, that one's etched into my memory forever. My parents bought this massive, super old mansion. When I say old, I mean it had these little rooms that were originally slave quarters built into the house. My mom even has some old black and white pictures of the first people who owned it. I should dig those up sometime. Right after they bought the place, renovations started. And that's when things got interesting. The builders who worked on the house? Several of them said it was haunted. One painter outright refused to go back inside after just one day, saying the place was spooky. But there was this one builder who told us he thought the spirits were actually friendly, so he didn't mind at all. Once the renovations were nearly done and we were living there, weirdly, even though 5 of us were in the house, my brother was even sleeping in those old slave quarters. Only my mom and I had any strange experiences. I remember those nights so clearly. I'd lie awake, freezing with fear, hiding under my blanket, praying for morning to come. Almost every night, I'd see these dark, shadowy figures. But the thing was, when they showed up, there was this incredible glow, like nothing I've ever seen before. We lived near an airport, and sure, planes would fly over sometimes, shining light into the house. But this light was different. It was almost magical, but also terrifying. I was terrified, but looking back, I wonder if it was just me being a little kid. These shadows didn't just stand there. They'd tip over my toy clown, the kind that rocks back and forth and jingles with little bells. It wasn't a big toy, maybe about 6 inches tall. They'd rock it gently and whisper my name over and over, almost like how you'd call a puppy, in this soft, happy voice. Years later, I talked to my mom about this. She'd see what was happening from her bedroom. Our rooms were set up so she could see my door frame from her bed. She'd hear me crying, then see a bright light grow at my door, and just as suddenly, it would vanish, and I'd stop crying, mostly because I was so scared. She'd get chills and sometimes couldn't move when it happened. She also heard a child's voice calling to her when she was on the 3rd floor, while we were all outside playing. This went on for years until we sold the house, which, by the way, was no easy feat when your 7-year-old is running around telling every potential buyer the place is haunted and that the ghosts visit him every night. Eventually, we sold it, and Mom even got a call from the new owners, upset that we hadn't told them the house was haunted. Mom just played it cool and pretended she had no idea what they were talking about. I was so relieved to move to a new place. Another big house, but one much newer. Mom insisted on that. We got all new furniture, TVs, beds, everything except for one thing: my old wardrobe. I didn't realize it at the time, but that wardrobe was the real troublemaker. The hauntings got even worse in the new house. Maybe I was older, so I remembered things clearer, or maybe it was just more intense. I'd have to sleep with a lava lamp on because the shadows would appear all night, not just when I was upset. They'd dance around my room, whispering my name, almost like they wanted me to talk back. Once I said, "Hello?" softly, but that only made the whispers louder and more intense. Eventually, I had to sleep in my parents' room to get some peace. The shadows even started to feel solid. I'd feel weight on my bed, like something was sitting there. One night, I woke up and saw my dad sitting at the end of my bed, fully dressed, just watching me. I asked, "Dad?" He smiled and waved, but didn't say a word. When I reached out to touch him, he vanished, and the weight lifted. It was so strange and scary. Finally, we got a new wardrobe, and the hauntings stopped. It's funny how something as simple as a piece of furniture could have such a hold. Since then, I've had lots more paranormal experiences, but those early years in those 2 houses really shaped how I see the world. It's a little scary sometimes, but also kind of amazing. I live in a tiny, tucked-away town in Oklahoma, the kind of place you could drive past 100 times and never notice. My neighborhood sits off the highway down this long gravel road that curves almost like a bent horseshoe, and the entrances are hidden behind thick trees. There's a creek running behind some of the properties, And most of us have an acre or two, so everyone has space. We mostly keep to ourselves. At night, it gets dark out here in a way that feels almost old-fashioned. There's hardly any light pollution, so the stars look close enough to touch. And we have every kind of animal you can imagine wandering around. Coyotes, bobcats, wild hogs, owls, bats, armadillos, deer, raccoons. I've even seen a fox and her little ones slipping through the neighborhood before sunrise. Usually, nighttime is loud. In the warmer months, you hear frogs, crickets, cicadas, owls, dogs barking at nothing. There's always something making noise. I'm a night owl, so I'm often awake until dawn. One night, around 2:30 in the morning, I went outside to finish putting a cover over my dog's run. My dog, Millie, had figured out how to climb out, and I was tired of her acting like a tiny prison escape expert. At first, I was just focused on the work. Then I noticed something that made my whole body go still. It was completely silent. No bugs, no owls, no coyotes, no dogs, not even wind in the trees. And then I heard it. A whistle. Not a bird, not an animal. A person's whistle. 3 low notes, quiet but close. It sounded like it was coming from the property behind mine, except nobody lives there. The man who used to own it passed away years ago, and the house has been sitting empty ever since. It's falling apart, and the land is a mess. People only come during the day sometimes to clear brush or haul junk away. But that whistle kept happening. Same 3 notes, every few minutes. I froze when I first heard it. My skin prickled, and every alarm bell in my head went off at once. I don't whistle at night. I don't answer whistles at night. I didn't call out, "Who's there?" I didn't turn around. I didn't run. I just kept working. I made myself finish the roof, one panel at a time, while that same little tune kept drifting out of the dark behind me. When I was done, I picked up my tools, walked inside like nothing had happened, locked the door, and didn't look back. And that wasn't the only strange thing. Another night, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone. I want to be clear. I was fully awake. I hadn't been asleep. I wasn't dreaming. My room has several windows, including one right above my bed that I keep covered with a dark towel. I was just minding my own business when I heard something speak outside. Not someone. Something. It sounded a few feet away, near the old storage barn my great-granddad built. The voice was low and distorted, almost like something was trying to copy a human voice, but didn't understand how a human mouth works. I couldn't make out the words. It was too warped, too thick, too wrong. I turned off my light and looked through the part of the window where the frosted film doesn't cover the glass. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, nothing moving. This neighborhood has seen some awful things too. One of my neighbors died in a house fire not long ago. His place didn't just burn, it exploded. He was an older man, a retired art teacher, kind in his own strange way, but he struggled a lot and lived surrounded by clutter. His property was packed with old furniture, cars, sculptures, and cane growing everywhere. From what people said, something caught near one of his heaters, and then the fuel tanks went up. The fire spread unbelievably fast. His dog got out. He didn't. The strangest part was that there was another house on the same property, and somehow it was untouched. The fire swallowed nearly everything around it, but that house and the cars nearby didn't even seem damaged. I've seen other things out here too. Once, my ex and I watched a huge ball of light fall from the sky straight toward my yard. We both ran outside to see where it landed, but there was nothing. No impact, no smoke, no sound. Nobody else nearby mentioned seeing it. I know how all of this sounds, I really do. But when these things happened, I was awake, clear-headed, and aware of what was real. A lot has happened on this land. Good people have lived here. Bad people too. People have died here. Animals have suffered here. I don't know if any of that connects to what I've experienced. What I do know is that I don't want to interact with whatever is out there. I don't answer it. I don't follow it. I don't whistle back. I just want my home to feel peaceful again, and some nights, when everything outside goes quiet all at once, I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting in the dark, hoping I'll come looking. This happened more than 20 years ago, but I still remember the feeling of that morning with awful clarity. My younger brother, Matthias, had some friends over for a sleepover, and by the end of the night, they decided they were going to play what people in Argentina call Juego de la Copa. It is basically like a Ouija board, except you make it yourself. You cut out letters, yes, no, and then you use a wine glass or a champagne glass to move around the table. At the time, kids at school were always doing it at sleepovers, mostly because they thought it was exciting to play with fire. But there were rules. Once you finished, you were supposed to say goodbye properly. Then you had to slide a piece of paper under the glass without lifting it, open a window, remove the paper, and close the window. It was close to 6 in the morning. I had barely slept because of the noise, and I had to leave soon for an internship. So I went over to see what they were doing. I stood there watching them, mostly because I felt uneasy, and I reminded them more than once to be careful and follow the rules. The house itself already had a heavy feeling to it. It was an old townhouse in Buenos Aires from the early 1900s. It belonged to my grandparents, though they had never actually lived there. And the table they were using had been passed down through the family, from my uncles to us. So even before anything happened, it already felt like there was too much history in the room. At first, nothing happened, just the usual nervous laughing and pretending. A couple of times they clearly faked it and acted like there was a spirit moving the glass. But then something changed. The glass started moving differently, stronger, faster, randomly but with force. Everyone immediately began accusing each other of pushing it, but I could hear it in their voices. They were scared. Whatever was moving the glass refused to give a name. It only said it was a woman, and with every question, it seemed to get more aggressive. One of the common questions people ask is whether the spirit dislikes anyone at the table. The glass shot straight toward my brother. That was when I had to leave. Before I went, I told them to say goodbye and do everything properly. Matthias knew the rules. They were around 15, old enough to understand that they should not mess around with it. But they didn't listen. They just lifted the glass and went to bed. About a week later, strange things started happening in the house. Doors opened on their own. Floorboards creaked like someone was walking through the rooms, but nobody was there. Objects shifted, fell, or moved without explanation. My siblings were terrified, and honestly, so was I. They told my parents, but my father could deny rain while standing in a storm, and my mother was even worse when it came to pretending nothing was wrong. Then the television started acting up. They would change channels in a strange pattern. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Always odd numbers. My mother insisted the TVs were just broken, but we knew better. Then they began turning on and off by themselves. It felt like whatever was in the house was getting bolder. A couple of times, I saw someone standing in the kitchen through another window. She had her back to me, long, dark, curly hair, and a white top. Then she started to turn. I screamed. When I looked again, no one was there. There was also a computer room with a door that led to a balcony. That door was always locked and permanently shut. One day, without me noticing, it opened completely. The whole thing started near the end of 2004 and went on until March of 2006, and by the end, it was no longer just strange. It was horror movie bad. One night, something sat on my bed. I felt the mattress dip. Then I felt something touching my leg, slowly making circles on it. I nearly fainted, but somehow I began praying. My siblings had their own experiences too. They said they felt someone pushing their beds, or sitting on them, or moving around their rooms when no one else was there. The faucets would turn on by themselves. Once, the kitchen faucet started running while I was on the phone with a friend, and she heard it. That was the first time someone outside the house witnessed anything. Another time, a friend came to visit. When we got back, the faucet near the entrance was completely open. I thought my parents had returned from the countryside, but they hadn't. It had opened on its own. Over time, I began to notice that whatever was there seemed to react to emotional moments in the house. If there was tension, sadness, fear, or conflict, things would get worse. And then came the worst moment. My brother was watching TV one night when the power went out, but somehow the television turned itself back on. The screen was incredibly bright, and across it, there was a dark shape moving from one side to the other. It kept passing back and forth, never stopping, as if it knew he was watching. Matthias was so frightened he could barely move. Around that time, he was dating a girl whose father was very spiritual. He told the man what had been happening in the house. The man said he would check what was going on, whatever that meant. Later, he said there was someone trapped there, and that she was becoming stronger. He promised he would get rid of her. A few days later, something in the house changed. I do not know how else to explain it. It felt lighter, quieter, peaceful in a way it had not felt for a long time. He told my brother she was gone. And she was. Years later, my nephews once mentioned that they wanted to play with a Ouija board. My brother practically shouted at them that he would kill them if they ever did. I think some memories never really fade. I grew up in a tiny town out in the Australian outback, in what everyone always said was the oldest house in the area. It was one of those sturdy old brick places that felt like it had soaked up every bit of heat, dust, silence, and memory the land had to offer. The family who built it had an indigenous Australian woman named Mara who helped raise their children. From what I was always told, she wasn't treated like hired help. She was loved. She was part of the household, part of the family in the way people remember long after someone is gone. But something terrible happened to her. She was murdered, and people around town still say she never really left. The local indigenous families in the area won't come near the house, even now. Not out of disrespect, I don't think. More like they know something about that place that the rest of us only brush up against. The strange part is, my bedroom growing up used to be hers, and things happened in that room all the time. My door would slowly open by itself while I was sitting there watching it. Not a little creak from a draft. I mean, it would open like someone was standing on the other side and gently pushing it. Our dog would stare into one empty corner of the room, wagging his tail like someone he knew was standing there. He never acted scared. He acted happy, like he was being greeted. As a kid, of course it frightened me sometimes. I'd lie there in the dark with my blanket pulled right up under my chin, listening for every tiny sound. But the funny thing is, it also comforted me. I never felt completely alone in that room. I imagined Mara was there, quiet, watchful, not trying to scare me, just existing alongside us. Now I'm grown, but I still go back to visit my dad. He lives in the house on his own, and he is not a superstitious man. Truly, he is the last person who would ever dramatize anything. If a noise happens, he'll blame plumbing, possums, old timber, loose hinges, anything practical before he'd say the word ghost. But lately, even he has started bringing things up. Cupboard doors open when nobody has touched them. Footsteps from rooms that should be empty. Knocking from the back of the house. The dog still staring at corners, wagging his tail at nothing. We always try to blame the house, except it's not some flimsy wooden shack groaning in the wind. It's solid brick, heavy, stubborn, built to last. A few months ago, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. The dog was asleep on the floor, completely out of it. We paused the show to talk for a minute, and right in the middle of our conversation, I heard a woman cough from the back of the house. Clear as anything. My dad didn't hear it, but I froze. We both went quiet, just sitting there, waiting. Then the dog suddenly jolted awake and started growling toward the hallway. That was enough for my dad. He grabbed a flashlight and went through the house, then outside, checking the property. He came back with nothing. No one there. No explanation. When he sat back down, he said, very calmly, "That'll be her." I thought he was joking at first. Then he told me that whenever something strange happens in the house, every single cabinet door is open by morning. I laughed it off. I told myself he was trying to scare me. But I woke up early the next morning and walked into the kitchen. Every cabinet door was open. Every single one. I still tried to convince myself it was a prank because, honestly, that was easier. The next day, we were doing renovations in the kitchen. The house had barely been changed since it was built, so even small updates felt like we were disturbing something old and settled. We installed a sliding ranch-style door between the kitchen and the living room. That night, we went to bed. Sometime in the early hours, we woke to this loud slapping sound, over and over. It was the new door hitting the wall it slid against. My dad got up, thinking maybe the windows were open and a breeze was moving it. But outside, the air was completely still. Not even a whisper of wind. And the door wasn't loose either. It was open and sitting snug against the wall. For it to make that sound, someone would have had to lift it or shove it back and forth. We couldn't explain it. The next morning, we walked into the kitchen. Every cabinet door was open again. My dad looked at me and said, "She must not like the door." So we took it down. And since then, nothing strange has happened. People always get freaked out when I tell them this. They say things like, "How could you live there?" Or, "I'm never coming over." But I don't feel that way about it. Knowing she's there has brought me a strange kind of peace. I don't really get scared by paranormal stories anymore, because to me, it doesn't feel like horror. It feels more like sharing space with someone who was there long before me, someone who still has a say in the house. So we respect that. If Mara doesn't like the door goes. At this point, she feels less like a ghost and more like a quiet roommate. And honestly, I think that old house belongs to her as much as it belongs to us.